I was shocked to discover that Kenny, who hadn't even attended my mother's funeral, had unexpectedly flown abroad with $200,000. "What on earth did you do with such a sum?" I asked him. "Do you remember that grand piano we had at home?" "I sold it, man," Kenny replied. "Coming from a wealthy family sure had its perks. That was a fine piano. I never imagined it would fetch $200,000. It seems Kenny mistakenly thought that the grand piano at home was his. My condolences. The inheritance rights to the family estate are all mine. However, that piano was originally bought by our grandfather for my brother, and it still belongs to him. My brother, who's always loved the piano and now works as a piano teacher, left it at our family home because it was too big for his house. Given my brother's strong sense of ownership, he would be furious to know that something of his had been sold without his consent. Knowing my brother, simply compensating him won't be enough. When I told Kenny this, he hung up immediately. My name is Rachel Schneider. I'm a 45-year-old office worker. My family has a distinguished lineage that dates back to colonial times and is well known in our community. Moreover, thanks to my late father's successful business, we now own assets worth $9 million. Originally, my older brother was supposed to inherit the family estate. However, he had a girlfriend from a family that also required an heir. Desiring to marry her at all costs, he declared that he would give up all inheritance rights in exchange for not taking over the family responsibilities. This left me with the challenge of needing to find a spouse to continue the family name. Even though I had always wanted to be independent without relying on family wealth, I focused solely on my career. Before I realized it, I found myself in my mid-40s and still single. I needed to find someone, or a family line would end with me, so I took a leap of faith and attended a singles mixer. That's where I met my current husband. His name is Kenny, and he's surprisingly 10 years younger than me. Yet, at the party, he didn't pay attention to any of the younger women and came straight to me. "Are you sure you want to be with someone as old as me?" I asked him repeatedly, but Kenny looked straight into my eyes and answered, "I'm a bit shy and not very assertive. I've always been drawn to older, more grounded women." True to his words, Kenny gave off a gentle, reserved vibe. I felt that he could bring some peace to my assertive family dynamics. As our relationship progressed, there was something I had to tell him. My mother had been bedridden due to illness since last year, and I was taking turns with my sister-in-law, Catherine, to care for her. Wondering how to break the news since we were considering marriage given our age, I finally mustered the courage to tell him on our third date, and to my surprise, he gladly accepted and even proposed, expressing his willingness to help with the caregiving. His kindness deeply touched me, at least that's how I felt in the beginning. Kenny, who works as a daycare teacher, seemed genuinely committed. However, a few months into our marriage, he suddenly expressed a desire to quit his job. When I inquired about the reason, he looked remorseful and said, "Sorry, Rachel. The parents at my daycare are just too demanding, and there's a lot of complaining. I just can't handle it anymore." Understanding the challenges he faced, I would normally have encouraged him to persevere. However, with him already helping with my mom's care, I found myself unable to say a word. Adding to the complexity, I was 3 months pregnant. Wanting to get along well with Kenny for the sake of our unborn child, I adopted a lenient attitude. Unfortunately, my leniency led to regret. As I came out of the shower and attempted to enter the bedroom, I overheard Kenny whispering on the phone. The content of his call shocked me to the core. I managed to get married without her finding out I'm unemployed. She totally believed me when I told her I quit my job, when in reality, I quit like 2 years ago. It sounded like he was talking to one of his buddies, who responded, "Man, you're really something." Well, Rachel's family is pretty wealthy around here. I thought I hit the jackpot when I saw her at that dating event. But then again, given her age, I was probably the only one to approach her. The revelation left me feeling deceived. Was the gentle Kenny I knew all just an act? Despite the desire to confront him immediately, the thought of our unborn baby rendered me speechless. Discovering Kenny's true intentions shattered my confidence in our future. Today, Catherine, my brother's wife, will be taking care of my mom until 5 p.m., and then it's my turn. Pondering whether I should confide in someone about Kenny, that's when Catherine spoke to me, noticing my troubled expression. Rachel, you look down. If something's troubling you, please share it with me. She's such a kind person, having taken care of her own mom for years, and she's really good with mine too. I confided in Catherine about Kenny, and she listened intently to my story. She reassured me, saying, "It's good you talked. Keeping this to yourself could have been harmful to your unborn child." I apologized for burdening her, but she responded with understanding, "No worries. Talking doesn't necessarily solve everything, but it surely lightens the load." Catherine seemed genuinely concerned, almost as if the situation were her own. Suddenly, the doorbell rang, and without waiting for a response, Kenny entered. Both of us were taken aback, but Kenny acted as if nothing was amiss and smiled, saying, "Rachel, I'm going to help with your mom's care from today. You're not in the safe period yet, so I don't want you straining yourself." Kenny was putting on the act of a gentleman in front of me, and I reluctantly agreed. When Catherine tried to offer assistance, Kenny spoke first, questioning, "I've been meaning to ask, why are you taking care of your mother-in-law in this house?" He used the same tone he used on the phone. Catherine explained the situation, but Kenny started saying horrible things to her. He accused her of trying to curry favor and insinuated that she'd be upset for not getting a piece of the inheritance if she married into money. Enraged by Kenny's harsh words, I wanted to leave the room, but Catherine signaled with her eyes not to. I reluctantly stayed quiet, watching the scene unfold. Kenny's attitude escalated, and he declared, "This family's wealth belongs to us, my wife and me, so I'll take care of my mother-in-law by myself from now on." Realizing it was pointless to say anything more, Catherine left the scene. I quietly slipped outside, feeling the weight of Catherine's hurt. I pondered how to extend my apologies to her. Meanwhile, Kenny took over the responsibility of caring for Mom entirely. Despite my offers to assist, Kenny insisted that I shouldn't intervene. He merely outlined the basics of caregiving. But his negligent approach resulted in tragic consequences. Our mother passed away. The funeral took place in a church where generations of our family found their final rest. However, Kenny disappeared from the day of Mom's passing. Despite my attempts to locate him amidst funeral preparations and arrangements, his absence perplexed relatives and neighbors alike. Catherine, tearful before the altar, apologized for entrusting Kenny with caregiving responsibilities. Approaching Catherine in her distress, I attempted to offer solace. "Catherine, please don't blame yourself. It's not your fault," I insisted. She shook her head, anguish evident in her voice. "No, Rachel, it's not your fault. But where on earth is that man? I wanted to confront him today, and he vanishes just as Mom passes away." Agreeing with Catherine's sentiments, I reflected on Kenny's frequent absences during his supposed caregiving duties. Neighbors mentioned his frequent departures from the house, casting doubt on his commitment to the task. They even noted the arrival of a large truck on one occasion. Though curious, I refrained from probing further amidst the funeral proceedings. Days passed, and Kenny remained absent. Then, unexpectedly, a call from Kenny disrupted my thoughts. "Hey, Rachel, I'm currently at a luxury hotel in Europe," he nonchalantly announced. Stunned, I demanded an explanation for his absence from Mom's funeral and his current whereabouts. Kenny's response was unexpected. "I spent $200,000. The mention of such a sum immediately triggered memories of the grand piano at our family home. "I sold it, man. It was a good one. Who would have thought it'd go for $200,000? It turned out that Kenny had sold the family's grand piano and was using the money to travel around Europe. The piano, which Mom said was a family heirloom, was indeed worth around $200,000. Apparently, the hotels Kenny booked were all quite luxurious, and he had quickly spent all the money. I never imagined Kenny would do something like this while supposed to be taking care of Mom. Our family home had tight security, but with family, it's a different story. The truck that had been at our home must have been there to transport the piano. Why on earth are you doing something so selfish? The whole family was worried about you since you weren't at the funeral. I confronted Kenny, feeling a mix of anger and disbelief. Well, you know when you have a kid, you won't have much free time anymore. You have a job, so I guess I got to be the stay-at-home dad, Kenny replied, surprising me with his nonchalant attitude. It's good that he wants to take on child rearing, but he seems intent on leeching off of me. Moreover, it appears Kenny mistakenly thought that the grand piano was mine. I explained to him that the piano originally belonged to my grandfather, who bought it for my brother. So the current owner is still my brother. Oh, is that so? You scared me there. It'll be fine if I just apologize to your brother later, right? Kenny seemed to lack any guilt about selling someone else's belongings. Well, Kenny has only met my brother at our wedding, so it's understandable he's unaware of my brother's intimidating nature. My brother works as a piano teacher, and ever since he was a child, he loved the piano. He pleaded with our grandfather to buy that specific piano, though currently there isn't space in his house for it, which is why it's at our parents' house. Yet he's still the owner. While working at a piano school, he has also expressed his wish to start his own school using that very piano. The piano means more to him than anything else. I can only imagine what kind of punishment he would impose on Kenny after hearing that it was sold without permission. By the way, my brother has a strong personality and hates dishonesty. I continued explaining. Kenny remained silent throughout. When he finds out you sold his cherished grand piano, mere compensation won't cut it. My brother's not just strong-willed, but he doesn't settle for compromises either. I pondered the kind of punishment awaiting Kenny after our tense phone call abruptly ended. With a stern warning, I knew he was probably feeling regretful, racking his brains for explanations. Without delay, I called my brother and recounted everything about the call. Needless to say, he was livid. The next day, as Kenny rushed home and entered from the front door, his eyes widened at the sight of everyone gathered in the living room. What's going on? Why is everyone here? He stammered in confusion. I had orchestrated the timing so that the whole family would be present when Kenny returned. My brother, along with his wife Catherine, fixed Kenny with a menacing glare. Kenny, I heard everything from Rachel. What were you thinking? Selling someone else's property, especially something that valuable, without consulting the family? My brother's voice was cold, cutting through the tension. Visibly nervous, Kenny tried to justify himself, claiming he was just trying to help with chores out of boredom when he stumbled upon the old grand piano. Really? That piano was special, imported by our grandfather from a top European manufacturer. Where's the money from the sale? My brother's stern expression demanded answers. As expected, my brother was playing the role of an interrogator, hoping to elicit a confession. Kenny hesitated, lost in thought, before stammering, the sales money. Yeah, it hasn't come in yet. It was a feeble attempt at an excuse, and my brother's anger erupted. You're lying. Just how rotten are you? He thundered, his disappointment palpable. Pointing out Kenny's souvenir-laden suitcase from Europe, my brother accused. What's with those souvenirs? I'm sorry, I used up all the money? Kenny's admission silenced the room, the shock evident on everyone's faces. Spending $200,000 on an overseas trip seemed unfathomable. My brother, with controlled intensity, confronted Kenny. I think you already know from Rachel, but that piano was mine. Now that it's gone, you're going to pay back every single penny. If you can't, I'm going to sue you for theft. You okay with that? His words hung heavy in the air, his demeanor reminiscent of a mob boss. Kenny, clueless about the law, looked to me for help, pleading in a pitiful voice. What did he expect me to do? I had nothing to do with this. It was all his doing. When I rejected Kenny's attempt to justify selling the piano, he began saying something ridiculous. Don't be so cold. I took care of your mom while you were pregnant. I just thought of the trip as a reward for myself after taking care of her. Let's just say we both decided to sell a piano. Since we're siblings, it won't be theft, right? I was so dumbfounded that I couldn't close my open mouth. Catherine came to my rescue, stating firmly, "Enough is enough. Didn't you tell Rachel not to come for caregiving? You even told me you thought I was just after the inheritance and tried to drive me away. What did you say such awful things to my wife too?" Kenny admitted to his insulting behavior towards Catherine, but my brother's anger flared again. "Listen up. The reason my wife took care of Mom was because she didn't want to go to a facility. My wife had experience caring for her own mother, so she kindly agreed to do it for mine. Money is a later issue. First, apologize to my wife right here, right now." Grabbed by the collar, Kenny, with tears in his eyes, knelt down in front of Catherine, saying, "I'm so sorry, Catherine." Despite Kenny's apology, all the relatives looked at him with cold eyes. One of them shouted, "You better pay back the money from the piano sale as soon as possible. We can't have a criminal in the family. It'll tarnish the Schneider's name." Kenny, misunderstanding once again, made another odd remark, saying, "Right. We can't have a criminal in the family, right, bro? So let's keep things calm. We'll save money together as a couple and pay back little by little." At Kenny's nonsensical interpretation, even my uncle was left speechless. Realizing that no matter what was said, it wouldn't resolve anything, I decided to fetch something from my room. Since the incident on the phone when Kenny was talking with a friend, I had the business card of a divorce lawyer ready. "Kenny, call this number. I want our relationship to be over. From now on, let's communicate through lawyers," I said as I thrust the card at him. His face turned pale, and Kenny exclaimed, "Why? We're about to have a baby, and yet, why are you doing this?" At that moment, I revealed what Kenny had been talking about with his friend on the phone. "Wait, you've heard that? It was just a joke. You think that excuse will fly?" I responded, "I've known from the start that you approached me for my inheritance." Everyone present gave Kenny a cold stare, realizing there was no way out. Kenny retorted with a defiant attitude, "Darn, I thought I was going to get close to $9 million after we got married. I researched how much your mother left you." The sudden change in Kenny, who had always seemed so gentle, shocked everyone. Perhaps I should have been suspicious of a man like him from the beginning. I met Kenny at a dating event, and despite being 10 years younger, I thought we married for love. But his betrayal hurt me deeply. From now on, Kenny would be a stranger to me and my brother, so naturally, he had to pay back the money from selling the grand piano. Kenny broke down, saying he couldn't do that. But with all the relatives present willing to testify against him, there was no escaping the consequences. However, I assured him that I wouldn't ask for child support. "Really? Well, at least I'm grateful for that," Kenny responded. "In return, Kenny, you'll have nothing to do with this child. This is my child alone. You can't even claim to be its father," I firmly stated, placing my hand on my belly. Upon hearing this, Kenny looked devastated and collapsed. Since the divorce, he had been living in poverty, working odd jobs. One day, my phone rang, and it was Kenny. Despite not wanting anything to do with him, he kept calling, so I reluctantly answered. "Rachel, please help me," Kenny pleaded in a pitiful voice. He explained that the buyer of the grand piano he sold wanted to return it and get a refund. When Kenny sold the piano, he had claimed it was in pristine condition. However, there was a large engraving on the back made by my brother, claiming ownership. Kenny hadn't checked the back and likely sold it through a shady dealer. Now facing the consequences, Kenny...
"Kate, what are you doing up so late? Where are you?" "I'm on a spa vacation with Luna." "Oh, I understand now. I discovered everything when my husband lied to me. I'm Kate, a 30-year-old office worker. I've been married to my husband Daniel for 6 years, and we have a 6-year-old daughter named Luna. Since we got married when I was pregnant, Luna is growing up to be a wonderful child." "Mom, I can help you." "Really? Can you roll the hamburger patties like this?" "Yes, I can do that." "There you go. Oh, Luna, you're really good at this. Here's one for Dad and one for Mom." This one is for Daddy. He's had a tough day at work, so he gets the big one. He might be so happy he'll cry." While I was having fun cooking with my daughter, my husband came out of the bath. Luna ran to him and said, "I made your hamburger, Daddy." He was happy too and said, "Really? I can't wait to eat it." We were enjoying our time as a happy family, or so I thought. Both my husband and I work, but he has a shorter commute and less overtime than I do. Because of this, I often ask him to pick up our daughter from kindergarten. Recently, he's been coming home late due to work, so I've had to pick her up and bring her home myself. My daughter said sadly on the way home from kindergarten, "I wonder if Daddy doesn't like me anymore." I think she misses him because he used to pick her up, and now he comes home very late. Sometimes he doesn't even get to see her. I gently patted her head, even though it hurt me to see her upset. "Daddy is working really hard for you right now. Once things calm down, he'll be able to spend more time with you." "Really?" "Yes, so let's support him together with Mommy." "Okay, I'll cook for him." She's such a sweet girl. I'm looking forward to the day when we can all eat together as a family again. But a few months later, my husband was still working long hours. He came home very late. Before, he used to be home by the last train, but now he's coming home at 2-3 a.m. or even taking the first train in the morning. "Are you sure it's all work? If you're just out drinking, I wish you'd come home and spend time with Luna." I couldn't take it anymore and told my husband how I felt. My daughter has been missing her dad for a month and looks really sad. My husband didn't like what I said and got upset. "Huh? What's with the tone? I go to work parties for the family's sake. It's unfair to accuse me like that." "Okay, I'm sorry, but you need to understand that Luna is feeling lonely because she doesn't get to spend time with you." After I said this, he went quiet and went straight to the bedroom. Since then, things have been awkward between us. Then, I was told by my company that I needed to go on a short business trip. There were a lot of things I needed to check in person, so I might have to stay 1 or even 2 nights. My first concern was what to do with my daughter. My parents lived too far away to help. I would have to ask my husband, but with how busy he's been, I wasn't sure if I could rely on him. Still, I had no other choice, so I waited for him to come home. I wondered if he had been out drinking again, and sure enough, he came home late. It was well past midnight, and around 3 o'clock, I heard the door unlock. "Welcome home." "Kate, I didn't know you were still up." My husband was surprised to find me waiting for him. I had stayed up because I needed to talk. "Huh? Talk?" He came home drunk, his face red, but now he looked pale as he sat down at the dining table and stared at me. "So, what do you want to talk about?" "It's not a big deal." But he seemed unusually upset. I told him about my upcoming business trip. It was short notice, but I had to leave in 2 weeks on Friday. I'd need to stay at least 1 night, and possibly 2 if there was a lot to do. I couldn't help but notice how strange he was acting. "Can you take care of Luna while I'm away? I know you're busy with work," I asked, feeling apologetic. My husband looked relieved. "Oh, that's totally fine." "Really?" "Yeah. Are you okay with work?" "Of course I'm busy, but I need to put you and Luna first." "How about I take a day off and take Luna on an overnight hot spring trip? I haven't had a chance to spend time with her lately. I'm sure Luna would love that." I was relieved to hear my husband say that. It showed he really cared about our family. I had been worried lately about whether he truly cared, but it seemed my concerns were unfounded. The next day, while taking my daughter to kindergarten, I told her the news. "What? Daddy and I can go on the hot spring trip together." She was so excited and happy, which made me happy too. When the day of my business trip arrived, it went better than I expected. It was my first trip since having Luna, but everything went smoothly. The people I met were very helpful and made sure everything was in order for me to check. The work went so smoothly that I finished by 7 p.m. that day. I thought, since I'm done, I might as well go home tonight. I wasn't sure if I'd be staying 1 night or 2 without knowing the status of my work. I planned to spend the first night at a manga cafe instead of a hotel to avoid cancellation fees. If I got a ticket, I could catch the last train home. I wanted to spend a relaxing evening at home if I could, so I hurried to the train and headed home. I imagined my husband and daughter enjoying a delicious meal at a hotel. The thought of my daughter's happy face made me feel better. I decided that I'd wake up early the next morning, clean the house thoroughly, and surprise them both. With that in mind, I arrived home around 11 p.m. I wonder why the light was on in the living room. Did my husband forget to turn it off? Frowning, I walked inside and found my daughter curled up on the sofa, crying. Oh, Luna, what's wrong? Mommy, why are you crying? Where's Daddy? My husband was nowhere to be seen. I was so upset I immediately started asking Luna questions. Daddy left this morning without me. What? What is going on? What was my husband thinking? I was furious with my husband's crazy behavior, but I needed to calm Luna down first. I hugged her tightly. I'm so sorry. I know you were lonely being alone so late at night. As I held her and stroked her head, she seemed to relax and started to fall asleep in my arms, exhausted from being scared and anxious. I gently carried her to bed, then went back to the living room to call my husband. Kate, why are you calling at this hour? Where are you? I'm on a spa trip with Luna. Why are you whispering? Luna is already tired and asleep. I don't want to wake her. Oh, I see. I'm sure she's asleep, but she's not with me. I realized my husband had lied to me. I was close to losing my temper, but I managed to stay calm. How's the trip going? It's great. I wouldn't mind staying another night. The food is good, and the hot springs are wonderful. Well, why don't we stay one more night then? I said that, and my husband sounded unsure. But Kate, you're coming home after one night, right? If you do, you'll be alone, so Luna and I will come back tomorrow. I knew exactly what he was worried about. He was afraid that if I got home first, I'd discover he had left her daughter alone. So I decided to lie. Well, I've got a lot of work to do and will be home later than planned. I'll need to stay another night, so don't worry about me. Enjoy your trip as long as you like. He didn't question my lie at all. Really? Then I'll extend the trip for one more night. Luna is really excited. I need to give her more time with her daddy since I haven't been able to spend much time with her recently. Okay, just make sure to call me when you know when you'll be back. My daughter's excited. What are you talking about? She was curled up and crying by herself. I held back my anger and ended the call. I was determined to make him face the consequences for the pain he caused Luna. I called my parents and explained everything. Then I quickly started packing my things and contacted a moving company. Luckily, I found a company that could come that day, so I arranged for them to move my stuff out. My daughter looked confused as she saw several men coming in and taking things out of the house. I need to talk to her. Luna, I've decided that we're not going to live with your dad anymore. I don't want you to be sad anymore. I'm going to quit my job and move in with Grandma and Grandpa so I can spend more time with you. But if we move to Grandma and Grandpa's house, you won't be able to see your dad. What do you want to do? I knew it was tough to ask such a question to a 6-year-old, but I wanted to know her thoughts. Will I never see Daddy again? If you really want to see him, I can arrange for you to visit him occasionally, but he won't be living with us anymore. I wanted my daughter to have the chance to see her father if she wanted, even though I doubted he would make time for her after the divorce, especially after leaving her alone at home while he went on vacation. As I was thinking about this, my daughter seemed to come to a decision. She looked me straight in the eyes and said, I'm going with you, Mommy. Daddy probably doesn't care about me. I cried and asked him, why are you leaving me? But he didn't answer and just left. I was deeply hurt that he made our 6-year-old daughter feel this way just so he could go on a vacation with his mistress. I felt he was a terrible man, a lousy father, and worthless. I regretted leaving my daughter with him and going on a business trip if it meant this would happen. Luna, I'm so sorry for making you so sad. I hugged Luna tightly, and we started working on the move. I decided to leave the rest of the issues with my husband behind and focus on settling in with my parents. A few hours later, my husband called. Hey, why is all your stuff missing? And Luna's things too. What's going on? Don't you know why? Of course not. Luna's crying because her stuff is gone. Do you really think you can keep lying to me after all this? That's strange. Luna is now eating noodles that my mother made. What? We already know you left your 6-year-old daughter alone at home while you went on a trip with someone else. How could you do that? You're not fit to be a father. If I hadn't come back that day, you could have traumatized Luna for life. My husband was stunned and silent, clearly not expecting me to be with Luna already. Anyway, you left your daughter alone just to be with another woman. I can't stay married to you. I want a divorce. Divorce? Oh no, please reconsider. I can't. I don't want to see you anymore. While we were on the phone, I heard the doorbell ringing repeatedly. Oh God, who could it be at a time like this? My husband sounded annoyed, but I knew who it was. Looks like they've arrived. Dad and Mom. I heard my husband's voice on the phone, followed by my father-in-law yelling, "What the hell are you doing?" And then a loud commotion. Well, that's the start. I guessed it was the sound of him getting beaten up. My father-in-law had practiced judo for many years and was now an advisor at a university. He adored his granddaughter, Luna. When I told him about my husband's infidelity and how he left Luna alone, he was furious. He said he was going to teach my husband a lesson. I decided to ask him for a favor. What the hell do you think you're doing with your own daughter? I didn't raise you to be such an... I could hear my stepfather's angry voice repeating his thoughts. Even though we lived in an apartment, I was glad we were on the first floor. If there were people living below, they might have complained. But since we'd already moved out, it didn't concern me anymore. My father-in-law really laid into my husband, both physically and mentally. After that, the divorce settlement went smoothly. I got full custody, and the alimony and child support were paid in one lump sum. I even managed to get alimony from the mistress. My husband tried to remarry the mistress, but she wasn't interested in a serious relationship and left him because he was too serious. At work, he's embarrassed about his affair. He's been disowned by his parents, dumped by his mistress, and now his daughter is with me. He's left with nothing but his own mess, and frankly, he deserves it. Meanwhile, I'm enjoying happy times with my daughter at my parents' house. My parents are farmers, so I help them out. My daughter loves eating fresh vegetables from the farm and enjoys being surrounded by nature. I'm committed to putting her first in my life. Leaving a young daughter alone for an affair? He should have faced legal consequences. I hope Luna isn't too heartbroken, but it feels good that my husband finally lost everything he had. Kate, I hope you and your daughter stay happy and continue to find joy together.
My husband Oliver told me, "I married you because you're the boss's daughter," with a smile. I was sick in bed, looking at the scarves and gloves I'd knitted for him tossed aside without care. His words hurt, making me realize I needed to confront him. Oliver and I have been married for 5 years. We don't have kids, but we've been happy together. He's always busy with work, which sometimes leaves me feeling lonely. But he tries to make time for us on his days off, which helps. I met Oliver through my dad, who used to be his boss. Oliver suggested I stay home after we got married, which seemed like a good idea at the time. It gave me time to pursue my hobbies like sewing and knitting. Every winter, I made Oliver scarves and gloves. At first, they weren't very good, but I improved over time. Oliver started saying they were as good as store-bought ones, which made me happy and encouraged me to keep sewing. One day I told Oliver, "Someday, when we have a child, I want us to sew together." He smiled and replied, "Maybe I'll learn when the time comes." I always supported Oliver, took care of the house, and made sure we spent time together on his days off. With his high salary, we seemed to live a privileged life to outsiders. I was content with this life, imagining a quiet future with my kind husband and our child. About 2 years ago, our peaceful life was interrupted. I suddenly felt dizzy and collapsed while waiting for Oliver to come home. He rushed me to the hospital. When I woke up in a hospital bed, I overheard Oliver talking to the doctor. My symptoms were serious and likely something I would have to deal with for life. It wasn't life-threatening immediately, but it could happen again. Given my condition, doctors advised me to stay in the hospital until I recovered somewhat. Seeing my anxiety, Oliver reassured me, "You'll be here for a while, but don't worry. I'll visit whenever I have time off from work. We'll get through this together." His words and his hand in mine eased my worries. With him by my side, I felt everything would be okay, despite not having any real guarantees. True to his promise, Oliver visited me nearly every day after that. He held my hand, checked on me, and brought my favorite sewing tools when I mentioned how boring the hospital days were. We spent time sewing together and chatting about little things that happened each day. Teaching him to sew was surprisingly enjoyable, and it helped pass the time. But after about a year, the regular visits dwindled. Instead of daily, Oliver started showing up only every few weeks. I figure he must be busy with work and continued sewing, planning to give him the finished scarf I was working on when he visited next. The doctor said I'd be discharged by the end of the year, so I also started making gloves to give him. After a long time apart, I poured my emotions into making the gloves for Oliver. But when he finally visited, he looked coldly at the gloves and said, "Are you still making these? It's annoying." He handed me back the scarf I'd made and divorce papers. The scarf, which I'd worked on tirelessly, looked brand new, untouched since I gave it to him. "You've been in a hospital for 2 years now. I heard you're getting discharged soon, but I can't keep taking care of you," he said. "Let's get a divorce." I looked at the divorce papers. Oliver had already signed them. I thought, so this is how it ends. Truthfully, I'd thought about this possibility ever since he stopped visiting regularly. I tried to convince myself he was just busy with work, but I knew the real Oliver wouldn't neglect me like this. If work had gotten in the way, he would have told me. When he stopped coming without explanation, I knew this was coming. That's why I managed to ask calmly why he wanted a divorce. I wasn't trying to hold on to Oliver. In fact, I knew I had probably become a burden to him. If the kind Oliver I knew wanted a divorce, then I guessed I had no choice. But since Oliver had promised we face things together, I was curious why he had changed his mind. When I asked him, still dazed, Oliver replied harshly, "Isn't it obvious? Since I married you, it's been nothing but trouble. I'm tired of those scarves and gloves you give me every year. I only married you because your father's the boss. How am I supposed to handle you getting sick on top of everything?" He laughed at me mockingly, saying he was fed up with dealing with me. It seemed he resented my innocent enjoyment of our life together. Whenever I talked about happiness, love, or loneliness, he seemed to think I was foolish. Who even wears handmade scarves anymore without feeling embarrassed? Getting those things from you was annoying and a hassle. As Oliver spoke, I noticed he was wearing a luxurious scarf that I hadn't given him. It was clearly better quality than the ones I had made. I wondered if he had never used any of my gifts before. Perhaps they had always annoyed him, and I hadn't realized. After I got sick and my father retired, Oliver no longer had to pretend to care about me at work. Having a sick wife became a convenient excuse for him. In the first year, he made a show of visiting me between his work duties. I could imagine my father, before retiring, praising Oliver at work for being a good husband who worked hard while looking after his sick wife. Oliver had crafted this image for himself and was well liked by his colleagues. That's what he wanted, and it seems my value to him was only realized when I fell ill. When I confronted him with these thoughts, Oliver looked surprised and admitted, "Well, it did make things easier at work. Whenever I mentioned you, people were sympathetic and treated me well. If I worked late, I was praised for being dedicated. If I needed a break, I just had to say my wife is, and that was enough." He said this without a hint of regret. He had cleverly used my illness to his advantage in ways I hadn't known. "And as for my upcoming promotion, well, they may be idiots, but I owe it to your illness," he added. As I listened with my head bowed, I looked up when he finished speaking. Instead of the man I loved, I saw a cruel grin on his face. I realized this was his true self. Well, if I could be of some use, then that's good. "We probably won't see each other again, so take care," I calmly said, returning the divorce papers to him. He took them without a second glance and swiftly left. That marked the end of our marriage, and I silently cried. After some time, I left the hospital and moved back in with my parents. When my father heard what had happened, he was outraged. "I never expected him to be like that," he said. But I had already made my peace. I reassured my father and told him I wanted to stay with them. After tidying up the house, my parents understood and encouraged me to do what made me happy. For now, that meant living with them. Before moving back with my parents, I decided to visit our old house. But when we arrived, the front door lock was broken. Perplexed, we rang the doorbell and were met by a stranger. I asked him about it, and he told us he had bought the house a few months ago and was now living there happily with his family. My parents were furious, but I chose not to disturb the new residents and quietly left. Unable to leave it be, I called my husband right away. He casually replied, "Yeah, I sold it while you were in the hospital. Keeping the money is my compensation. It was my house originally, so you can't complain, right?" His nonchalant words made me sigh. I wish he had told me sooner, I thought. From what I learned, the house had been sold about a year ago, around the time he started showing less concern for me. Even if he had planned to divorce me, selling our home without discussing it was shocking. Although we had finalized our divorce by signing the papers, we still needed to discuss dividing our assets after my discharge. We had scheduled a meeting for the following week, but my husband had acted on his own, which was beyond belief. When I calmly confronted my husband over the phone, telling him he didn't understand anything, he seemed puzzled. "What do you mean?" he asked. I replied, "I'll explain next week," and hung up. I smiled at my concerned parents and asked my father for a favor. I shared my plans with him and asked him to get everything ready. "I've already prepared all the necessary documents. There's not much time before our meeting next week, but we'll manage," my father said, with a slightly worried smile. As my father, he probably felt guilty for introducing me to my husband. His anger toward my husband spurred him to do everything possible to help me. I thanked him and looked forward to our meeting day. Just imagining my husband's face made me smile for the first time in a while. With my father's support, I got ready for the meeting. We decided to meet at my parents' house. We sat in a row, my parents and I on one side, and my husband on the other. He must have known my parents were hurt by the divorce, but he seemed indifferent now. He probably felt there was no need to respect my parents anymore. He remained composed, even showing a hint of a smirk. His attitude was disrespectful and arrogant. "I'm the one who's been wronged here, but I don't plan to ask for too much," I said calmly. "The money from selling the house will be enough," my husband replied, trying to appear generous. My father's face turned red with anger, but I gently placed my hand on his to calm him. We knew that in this discussion my husband was the one at a disadvantage, so there was no need for us to get overly upset. "Before we proceed, there's something important to discuss," I continued, and my father handed over a document. It proved that the land under the house my husband sold belonged to my father. "Yes, the house was in your name, that's clear. But the land belongs to my father, and he holds the title," I explained, showing him the document. My husband frowned slightly. "So what? The house was still mine. No one can complain. Do you think this gives you a way to get back at me?" He chuckled as if he found the whole situation absurd. "It's true that legally, selling the house under my husband's name posed no issues, even though the land belongs to my father," I explained further. "However, this creates a significant problem for the family who bought the house. You sold the house, right? But since my father owns the land, he could demand rent from the family living there. Wouldn't that cause trouble?" I questioned. "We're not planning to take that step, but we won't give up our land rights for nothing. In this situation, our plan is to offer the family the opportunity to purchase the land. We won't ask them to leave or charge rent monthly, but it would be problematic if they refuse to buy the land. Originally, my father intended the land as a gift for us to live on, not to be given away freely to strangers. If they refuse, the family who bought the house might even sue you because the deal wasn't as they were led to believe. Imagine their frustration buying their dream home only to find out they have additional expenses." After we confirmed my father's ownership of the land, we went straight to the family who bought the house. When we explained the situation, they were understanding. They agreed that if there were any legal issues, it would be the seller's responsibility, meaning my husband. They mentioned they might sue him if negotiations failed. Seeing my husband's face go pale, I knew he realized the seriousness of the situation. He understood he could face significant financial consequences. In a shaky voice, he asked, "What should I do?" I smiled and replied, "The family could buy the land from us to settle everything smoothly. You'll have to cover that cost. Once they own both the house and land, all current issues will be resolved. Since they weren't informed of the land's value when buying the house, they might demand compensation from you. But that's their decision. The problem is, due to its prime location, the land could be worth more than the house. Even if my husband sells all his assets, it might not be enough. In the end, he could be left with nothing. Alternatively, you could buy back the house and pay for the land, along with a relocation fee to the family. This would return both the house and land to your possession. You could then sell them again, possibly making some money. However, after paying the relocation fee, it's unlikely you'd end up with much," I explained. "Either way, you're facing losses," I continued. "And regarding alimony, your actions have caused me significant mental distress. I intend to seek compensation for that, so keep that in mind. I've come to realize you used me as a pawn for your career ambitions. Now that I know this, I'm repulsed by everything you've done, and I plan to pursue damages for the emotional distress it's caused me. While evidence may be limited and winning uncertain, discussing this matter is crucial given your current situation." Cornered, Oliver may soon face these harsh realities, my father added. "Despite being retired, I still have many connections from my career. I've been in touch with former colleagues who have shared your opinions and actions regarding my daughter. You're being looked down upon by everyone, Oliver." With a cheerful smile, my father shared the news, and finally, Oliver understood the gravity of his situation. The status he had built at work, using me and the money from selling the house without my consent, was slipping away. "Now let's discuss what happens next," I said, clasping my hands together and smiling. It was a different smile from any Oliver had seen before, brighter since our separation. "You must understand that the fate of your assets will be decided today," I continued. Drawn in by my words, Oliver could only manage a forced laugh, tears in his eyes. The negotiations favored me, and Oliver agreed to pay alimony. We also settled that Oliver would compensate for the land where the house stood, which we then explained to the family who bought our house. In the end, everyone benefited except Oliver, who lost everything. The rumors my father started spread through the company, causing Oliver to lose his status and halt his chances for promotion. As the rumors continued, Oliver found himself isolated, and eventually my father informed me that Oliver had resigned. It's tempting to see it all as karma, as gains made through exploitation are fragile. What Oliver thought he had achieved turned out to be fleeting. As for me, I'm living in my parents' home now and teaching sewing classes. My classes aren't packed, but I earn a decent income thanks to local participants like neighborhood women and children. Although I couldn't have children of my own, as I once mentioned to Oliver, I've discovered that sharing my passion brings me genuine happiness.
You can't even handle household chores, so we might as well get a divorce, Tom, he said with a smirk as he entered the hospital room. I was connected to various medical devices, and a girl I didn't recognize stood by his side. Little did Tom know I had assets worth $6 million, and divorce in this situation would be a matter of life and death for a housewife like me. Fine, he has the divorce papers, I thought to myself. I couldn't be with a man who verbally abused his wife in such a state. I reached into my bag, pulled out the divorce papers I'd always carried with me, and handed them to Tom with a grin. He accepted them. Now I can say goodbye to you. I'll be happy with her, so don't worry, Tom said as he wrapped his arm around the girl, referred to as Catherine Lyon. She sneered at me and said, "Take care, Misso. You're not Miss anymore. Take care, ma'am." With those words, the two of them left the hospital room, laughing. But their happiness would only last for now. Alone in the room, I couldn't help but laugh out loud. Today was Friday, so the divorce would be processed on Monday. Oh, I couldn't wait for 3 days from now. My name is Annalie Johnson, a 45-year-old housewife from a regular farm. I didn't have any particular skills, but I was proud of my vast cooking repertoire. My husband, Tom, and I were the same age and had been college classmates. We both came to New York from the countryside, and since we lived alone, I used to cook various dishes for Tom using the vegetables and rice sent from my family. People often said I had captured his heart through his stomach, and I was aware of that. Tom was and still is incapable of doing any household chores. I had been taking care of him since we were dating, and after getting married, I continued to handle all household tasks. Sadly, we were not blessed with children, but we enjoyed our life together as a couple. We both loved to eat, and on Tom's days off, we'd often go on drives for small trips just to enjoy delicious food. When we first got married, Tom was kind. But about 3 years in, he became quite controlling. Well, he never laid a hand on me, but his remarks became curt, and he would often say things that hurt. But I didn't have the energy to fight back, assuming he wouldn't listen anyway. Because I was a full-time housewife, I felt inferior and couldn't stand up to him. Tom joined a renowned company after graduating from university, but he resigned after about 5 years. He quickly found new jobs, but would resign from them after short periods. Because of this, our income was unstable, and we often struggled with our finances. However, at the company he'd been with for the past 2 years, he seemed to get along with his colleagues. I had faint hopes that he might work there for a long time. Then one day, Tom came home earlier than usual. "I'm home. I quit my job." "What again?" I unintentionally voiced my surprise, causing Tom's eyebrows to twitch. In a panic, I stopped cooking and rushed over to him. "I'm sorry. I was just shocked." "Huh, no welcome back greeting, and you're criticizing." "You've become quite audacious," Tom responded sharply. At Tom's words, I stiffened. He was in a very bad mood today, and if I misspoke, it could escalate into something worse. "I'm sorry," I said cautiously. "As long as you understand," he grumbled. My apology had somewhat placated him, and he sat on the sofa, turning on the TV. I quietly placed a beer and a glass on the table. "Do you want dinner or a bath?" I asked. "Food and alcohol," he replied. To avoid upsetting Tom, I played the role of the submissive wife. I once had a strong sense of self, but after 14 years of marriage to Tom since the age of 28, I rarely showed my true self. After eating and drinking to his heart's content, Tom seemed to be in a better mood. He fell asleep on the sofa, snoring loudly. The table was in such disarray that it looked like a child had eaten there. I began cleaning up the fallen beer bottles and food scraps scattered on the floor. This wasn't how I had envisioned my married life. Memories of happier days as a young girl in love revealed my true feelings. I stole a glance at Tham, but he showed no signs of waking. Relief washed over me, but alongside it was a growing sense of dread about continuing this life. Perhaps divorce was a consideration. I started mentally organizing my schedule for the next day, determined to confront the issues I have been avoiding. The following day, while Tham began visiting the employment office and quickly securing another job, I went to the city office and signed divorce papers. I wasn't quite ready to submit them, but I felt having them would be a form of protection. I discreetly stashed the signed divorce papers at the bottom of my frequently used bag. If he were to discover them, who knew what he might say or do? "Hey, where did you wander off to while I was job hunting?" Tham asked upon my return. "I went to the stationery store to buy some reasons." "Look, I thought you might need them," I replied. Tham was unusually thoughtful that day. He initially interrogated me suspiciously, but quickly cheered up. I handed him the resumes I had bought earlier. After receiving them, Tham mentioned that he was going out for drinks with a friend and left. His new job was with a reputable company, offering a solid salary and better benefits than his previous positions. I harbored a secret hope that perhaps, this time, Tham would stick with his new job until retirement. His new department seemed to be in sales, and he started leaving home more frequently for evening entertainment. I cherished these brief moments of freedom and gathered the energy to greet Tham with a smile when he returned. One day, I received a call from my mother after a long time. She excitedly told me about an unexpected windfall of $6 million. "You know the mountains and lands we owned? We don't need them anymore. We had them appraised, and they are worth $8 million. We only need $1 million to enjoy the rest of our lives, so I think you might want to rethink your life too." My mother was never fond of Tham, and she had been worried about me, especially after Tham became more controlling, preventing me from even visiting my childhood home. The amount she mentioned stunned me, but what shocked me even more was that she had changed the title of the property inherited from my grandmother to my name to avoid inheritance taxes. It was a difficult decision whether to tell Tham about the inheritance or to embrace newfound freedom. About a week later, I was involved in a traffic accident. Thankfully, my life wasn't in danger, but I would need to be hospitalized for about a week. After securing my valuables in the hospital room drawer, I immediately contacted Tham. "I'm sorry I got injured." Tham's initial reaction was, "Huh? What about my meals?" I almost confronted him for prioritizing his meals over my injury, but I continued to explain, "It seems I'll need to be hospitalized for a week." "I'm really sorry, but could you buy your meals elsewhere until then?" Tham's response was far from understanding. "Not even preparing meals for your husband? What a lazy wife." "Oh, wait, I'm coming over now." He abruptly ended the call. I had initially planned to tell him about the inheritance that night, but now I wondered if it might be best not to mention it. As I lay in the hospital bed, surrounded by various tubes and undergoing precautionary examinations, I couldn't help but feel that my intuition about the unfolding events was about to prove correct. Tham's words had cut deep. "You're useless, can't even do housework. Let's get a divorce, and you better pay me compensation." With a smirk on his face, he had said this to me, connected to numerous medical devices. Beside him stood a girl I didn't recognize. Unaware that my total assets amounted to $6 million. He should have realized that a divorce under these circumstances would be a matter of life and death for me. "Fine, here are the divorce papers," I finally decided. A man who would hurl abuse at his wife in this condition was someone I'd rather not have. I handed over the divorce papers I had kept as a sort of charm, and Tham accepted them with a smug smile on his face. "With this, I can finally say goodbye to you. I'm going to be happy with her," he declared, wrapping his arm around the girl he referred to as Catherine. Catherine, the girl with Tham, leaned against him and made fun of me. Take care, madam. Oh, you're not a madam anymore. Take care, old lady, she said. They left the room laughing, but their happiness wouldn't last long. In my hospital room, I burst out laughing. It was Friday, and the divorce papers would be processed on Monday. I couldn't wait for those 3 days. As expected, the weekend passed without any contact from Tham. It was quite peaceful, but I felt restless. I wasn't used to doing nothing. Every time I became restless, the nurses told me to stay calm. On Monday evening, I received a series of calls from Tham. At first, I ignored them, but after about 30 minutes of nonstop ringing, I decided to answer. I told him to stop being so persistent. Tham shouted at me as soon as I picked up, and I couldn't help but laugh, which seemed to make him even angrier. Tham was furious about the divorce papers not being accepted. I chuckled and told him that I had previously filed a notice of non-acceptance. I reminded him of how he used to casually mention getting divorced whenever we had a fight. I thought it wouldn't be a good idea if he filed for divorce on a whim during one of our arguments. Tham was upset but quickly changed his mind. He wanted me to withdraw the non-acceptance immediately. However, I had decided that I wouldn't just do everything he said anymore. I explained that I couldn't do it until I was discharged, and we needed to go through procedures at the municipal office before I could leave the hospital. Tham's selfish demands made me laugh even more. It seemed like he wanted to register his marriage with Catherine, whom he brought on Friday. Tham was panicking, and I asked if her name was Catherine and if she was his mistress. Tham clarified that she was his new wife, and since we weren't divorced yet, she technically was my mistress. I calmly responded to Tham's nonsensical remarks, making him groan. I made the decision to hit him where it hurt the most. I mentioned that he would hear from my lawyer about the division of property, including the trouble this time. I had always taken care of the household chores and had never cheated on him. It was clear that Tham was the responsible party, not me. Tham seemed genuinely puzzled and believed that not taking care of him while I was hospitalized would make me at fault. I explained patiently that not being able to do housework during my hospitalization didn't make me at fault. He had abandoned taking care of me, and even if I were a child, it would be considered neglect. But as an adult, he should be able to take care of himself, so it didn't make me at fault. Tham's logic was baffling, and even a judge would be shocked. Finally, he seemed to understand, but he still believed he was right. He insisted that Catherine was his new wife, and I was no longer of any use to him, so it didn't apply. I pointed out that he was dating her behind my back, which was clearly cheating. Tham still didn't seem to get it, and he believed he was right. I decided to end the conversation and told him to communicate through a lawyer from now on. I hung up the phone without listening to his protests. Tham called multiple times, but I ignored him, and eventually he gave up and fell silent. I was relieved that the next day brought another headache. The phone kept ringing from 9 o'clock in the morning, and I pressed the call button. Tham complained about not being able to withdraw money from a bank account. If it was a joint account, he should be able to withdraw without any issues. But I remembered the bank cards and passbooks I had left at home and asked Tham if he was trying to access my account. Tham confirmed that he was trying to take money from my account. Tham was furious and continued with his unreasonable arguments. He didn't seem to understand what I had explained the day before. When I was going to be hospitalized for a week, I had called the bank to prevent any withdrawals until I could handle it personally after being discharged. This was to stop Tham, who wasn't careful with money, from using my savings while I was in the hospital. My decision turned out to be the right one. It's not right to try to take money from an ex-wife's account, especially after a divorce. However, Tham didn't see anything wrong with it and asked me to make a withdrawal immediately. I reminded him that we were practically strangers now, and I had no money to give to strangers. Tham was shocked by my resistance since I had never stood up to him like this before. He insisted that I send the money and pay compensation for not doing housework. Unfortunately, it seemed that despite his academic capability when we first met, he lacked common sense after 17 years of marriage. I addressed Tom as if he were a child, explaining that I was no longer his submissive wife, and we would settle the property division through a lawyer. He became angry and threatened to come over right away. I didn't mind if he came to the hospital, but I had already asked the nurse's station not to let anyone in except for my parents, so it was unlikely he could get to my room. However, Tom did come to the hospital, but it seemed he was stopped at the nurse's station as my phone kept ringing. After ignoring it for a while, it switched to messages, and my screen was flooded with notifications. I saved all of them as evidence and contacted my lawyer. After a while, it seemed that the lawyer had gotten in touch with Tom as the messages stopped coming in. Just when I thought it was over, there was a new development. I was informed about a visitor named Karen, whom I had known for a long time and shared my interests. She had responded to my posts about dining experiences on a social media platform. We used to go out for meals together before I got married. She expressed concern about my injury and shared her suspicions that Catherine, the young girl with Tom, was having an affair with my husband. I was shocked and asked her how she knew it. It turned out that Catherine was Karen's niece. She had told her sister, Karen's mother, about getting married to a 45-year-old man, and when Karen saw a photo, it was of my husband. I couldn't believe the twist of fate. Karen had already informed her sister about the trouble her niece had caused me. Karen was thinking of demanding compensation from Catherine and assured me that our friendship would continue. She didn't want to lose a precious friend over the situation. She had scheduled a meeting with them to sort things out. I was grateful for her support and friendship, which had lasted for over 20 years. The next day, after leaving the hospital, I went to a private restaurant room with my lawyer. Tom and Catherine were already there, enjoying an expensive traditional meal. I was surprised at their audacity. Tom reminded me to bring money and pay for the meal. I decided to stand up for myself and told them to handle the payment themselves. I was there to demand a share of the assets from both of them. Ignoring Tom's rude comments, my lawyer and I took our seats and presented evidence to show that Tom was at fault. We showed legal documents explaining why Tom was responsible and documents regarding the division of property. We'd also displayed photos provided by Karen, which showed Tom and Catherine together and Catherine with an unknown man entering a hotel. This surprised Tom and Catherine, and they stopped eating. Karen arrived at the right moment and admitted to taking those photos. Catherine was confused about her aunt being there. Karen explained that she wanted to continue being friends with me, even though she demanded compensation from Catherine. She felt that Catherine's actions were despicable. Catherine mentioned being pregnant, but when Karen saw her, she didn't look pregnant at all. Tom seemed shocked by this news, and Catherine suddenly admitted that she had lied about the pregnancy and apologized. She had been looking for wealthy older men, and Tom was the one who fell for her scheme. She confessed that she had lied about being pregnant because Tom showed no signs of wanting to divorce. Tom was speechless, claiming he had no money to give. Karen mentioned that she would bring Catherine for another apology later and took her out of the restaurant. Tom tried to convince me that he had been deceived and asked if we could start over. He said I couldn't work since I had always been a housewife. I told him I could live without him and that I'd be filing the divorce papers soon. I revealed that I had around $6 million in personal net worth, so I could live comfortably without working. Tom was surprised and wanted a share of my money, but I explained that it was my personal inheritance and didn't count as marital assets. We left, and I filed for divorce, ending our nearly 20-year marriage. Catherine later transferred some money to my account, and her mother made her work to prepare the compensation. Tom was disowned by his in-laws and had to take out a loan to pay me. He lost his job due to being with Catherine at a hotel during work hours and now works multiple construction jobs to repay his debts. I used the money I received for charity and moved to the countryside with the remaining amount. I'm now enjoying a luxurious single life, continuing my relationship with Karen. We plan to stay single and even share a room, go on food tours, and take short trips together. Moving preparations will begin next week, and I'm excited to live life joyfully and true to myself from now on.
When I got married, my mother-in-law had sneered, "I just don't understand why you're still working." Her disdain was unmistakable. A woman's place is at home with her children. Gary, my husband, never once stood up for me. He'd brush off their cruel comments, telling me to ignore them, but their words were like relentless needles, slowly eroding my confidence. With my own mother gone and my marriage deteriorating, my resentment toward Gary grew. He had never truly been there for me, leaving me alone to bear the weight of his family's criticism. I remember being pregnant with Amanda and hearing his parents' thinly veiled disappointment when she was born. "Next time, make sure it's a boy," they said, hardly bothering to mask their dissatisfaction. It hurt deeply to watch my daughter face such blatant favoritism. Now, Gary wanted to use my inheritance to move us closer to his parents, pulling us even further into their toxic world. The idea was infuriating, and I knew I wouldn't let that happen. Sitting alone in the quiet, surrounded by my mother's things, I started forming a plan. I would no longer be a passive observer in my own life. I would fight back, not just for myself, but for my children. Over the next few days, I gathered every document I could find, preparing for the legal battle ahead. My lawyer, a sharp-witted woman named Ms. Kathleen, reassured me. "We have a strong case, Denise," she said confidently. The battle lines were drawn. For the sake of my dignity and my children's future, I would stand my ground. Then one evening, while sorting through my mother's belongings, I discovered an old, dusty envelope tucked away in a drawer. Inside was a treasure trove of stock certificates and property deeds, revealing the fortune she had quietly amassed. My hands shook as I grasped the magnitude of her hidden wealth. More than $6 million in assets. I could hardly believe it. She had lived so modestly, but this showed the depth of her sacrifice and foresight. There was a note in her careful handwriting. "Denise, I saved this for a rainy day. I hope it gives you and the kids a better life. Use it wisely." Tears filled my eyes as I felt her love and protection, like a comforting embrace from beyond. The next day, determined to confront Gary, I found him in the living room, flipping idly through a magazine. "Gary, we need to talk," I said, my voice steady. He glanced up, irritation flickering in his eyes. "What is it now, Denise?" This time, I was ready. This time, I wouldn't back down. I held up the envelope, feeling a mix of shock and gratitude as I explained, "I found something my mother left behind. Turns out, she left me stocks and properties worth $6 million. Gary's eyes widened, a flash of greed and shock evident on his face. $6 million? That's incredible," he exclaimed, his tone unnervingly eager. I met his gaze, resolute. "Don't get any ideas, Gary. This money is mine," I said firmly, disgusted by his reaction. This inheritance was a testament to my mother's love and foresight, a gift intended to provide a better life for me and our children. "You won't see a cent of it," I added, watching as his expression darkened. "You can't just keep it all to yourself, Denise. We're married. What's yours is mine," he snapped, his frustration evident. Anger surged within me. "Is that all you care about, Gary? You don't see me or the kids. You only see dollar signs," I accused, realizing how much he had changed. Gary abruptly stood, his face red with fury. "You're being selfish, Denise. I'm thinking about our family's future," he argued. "What family, Gary? The one you're willing to sell off for your own gain?" I shot back. He took a step toward me, fists clenched. "You'll regret this, Denise. I'll make sure of it," he threatened. But I didn't flinch. "Bring it on, Gary. I'm not afraid of you anymore." With that, he stormed out, leaving me to collect my thoughts. I knew this was only the beginning of a bitter struggle, but I was ready to fight for my children, for my mother's legacy, and for myself. The following week was a blur of legal consultations and tense silences at home. Gary's shock had turned to a cold, calculated aggression, like a caged animal, desperate and dangerous. Then one evening, after the kids were asleep, he cornered me in the kitchen, his gaze wild and menacing. "You think you're clever, Denise? Hiding that money from me?" he sneered. My heart pounded, but I held my ground. "It's not about being clever, Gary. It's about doing what's right. That money is for me and the kids, not for your selfish fantasies." "I'm your husband. I have a right to that money," Gary snarled, slamming his fist on the countertop, making me flinch. His words dripped with venom, but I wasn't about to back down. "A right to what, Gary? To a woman who won't be bullied into giving you everything?" I shot back, meeting his furious glare. His face contorted with anger. You'll regret this, Denise. I'll make sure you don't get a dime of that money. He spat, his voice thick with menace. But despite the fear his threats stirred, my resolve only hardened. I was determined to protect what my mother had entrusted to me. Is that a threat? I demanded, standing firm as he leaned in close, his breath reeking of bitterness. It's a promise, he hissed. I stepped past him, my heart pounding but my resolve like steel. We'll see about that. The court will decide, I said, striding away as his venomous words echoed behind me. You're going to end up with nothing, Denise. Nothing. The following day, I received a call from my lawyer. Denise, Gary has filed for divorce. He's claiming half of your inheritance, she informed me. Taking a steadying breath, I replied, let him try. I'll fight him every step of the way. Ms. Kathleen's voice was firm with reassurance. Don't worry, Denise, she said. We have a strong case. Justice will be served. That night, as I lay in bed, my thoughts turned to my children, sleeping peacefully in their rooms. This battle wasn't just for me, it was for their future. Gary had become a stranger, consumed by greed and resentment, but I was no longer the woman he thought he could intimidate. As I drifted towards sleep, I pictured the courtroom, the judge, and myself standing tall, not just for the inheritance, but for my dignity, my children's future, and the quiet strength my mother had instilled in me. The legal fight was brutal. Gary's tactic was obvious, to paint me as an uncooperative wife hoarding the family's resources. But his arguments were flimsy, rooted in desperation rather than substance. During a mediation session, in a last attempt to reach a settlement before trial, Gary sat across from me, his lawyer by his side. His gaze was cold, his demeanor bordering on arrogant. Let's be reasonable, Denise, his lawyer began smoothly. Gary is entitled to a portion of this inheritance. It's only fair. I glanced at Miss Kathleen, my resolve unwavering. Fair, I replied, my tone firm. Gary has contributed nothing to this inheritance. It was left to me by my late mother, intended solely for me and our children. Gary's claim to my inheritance wasn't just a legal fight, it was a moral one. My mother had worked tirelessly to save this, not for Gary's whims but for the future and security of her grandchildren. This inheritance wasn't just money, it was her legacy. I was prepared to defend it with everything I had. Gary leaned forward, his tone dripping with scorn. Come on, Denise, you're just being spiteful. Don't you think the kids would want their father to have a share? A surge of anger flared within me. This isn't about spite, Gary. It's about justice, I shot back, my voice sharp. You've never once considered what the kids truly need? This is about your greed. His lawyer began to interrupt, but Gary waved him off. You think you can take everything, don't you, Denise? Play the grieving daughter and the victimized wife. I met his glare, my voice calm but resolute. This isn't a game, Gary. You're the one trying to take what isn't yours. The mediator, a stern-faced woman, raised her hands in an attempt to bring order. Let's keep this civil. We're here to find a resolution. Gary cut her off, his voice rising. Resolution? She's the one being unreasonable. The tension in the room was thick and suffocating, but I kept my tone steady. I am being reasonable, Gary. I'm protecting what my mother intended for her grandchildren. Your claims are baseless. Seeing we were at an impasse, the mediator called for a break. As we stood, Gary leaned close, his breath hot against my ear. You'll pay for this, Denise. I'll make sure of it. I walked out of the room, heart pounding, but my resolve solid. His threats were empty, his case weak, and I knew the law was on my side. I was determined to see this fight through to the end. In the weeks that followed, I immersed myself in legal preparation. Miss Kathleen and I went over every detail, every document, ensuring I was ready for what lay ahead. The children stayed with my sister, shielded from the turmoil. I missed them dearly, but I knew this battle was as much for their future as it was for mine. Finally, the day of the hearing arrived. Standing in the courtroom, I felt a surge of strength, prepared to defend my mother's legacy. I braced myself, prepared to face Gary and dismantle whatever twisted story he intended to tell. This was the moment of truth, and I was ready to defend my mother's legacy and secure my children's future. I steeled myself, channeling every ounce of strength into the fight ahead. The courtroom became a battleground where words served as weapons. Gary's attorney painted him as a wronged husband unjustly denied his share. But under Miss Kathleen's skillful cross-examination, his arguments crumbled like a fragile house of cards. During a recess, Gary confronted me in the hallway, fury twisting his face. You're ruining everything, Denise, he snarled. Do you really think you're going to walk away with all that money? Despite the fear clawing at my insides, I held my ground. It's not your money, Gary. It never was. He stepped closer, his voice a venomous whisper. I'll drag this out as long as it takes. I'll bleed you dry with legal fees. I met his gaze, steady and unwavering. Do what you must. I won't let you bully me into submission. As we returned to the courtroom, I felt a surge of empowerment. Gary's threats seemed hollow, his bravado masking desperation. The final verdict brought vindication. The judge ruled in my favor, recognizing the inheritance as solely mine. Gary's expression of defeat was unmistakable. While I'd won the legal battle, it came at the cost of my marriage. The family I once knew had shattered. In the weeks that followed, Gary's life unraveled. His reputation, once built on intimidation, crumbled as people saw him for the greedy man he truly was. Word of his downfall soon reached me. He'd lost his job, his friends distanced themselves, and his standing in the community was in tatters. His fall from grace was sharp, and though I couldn't feel pleased, there was an undeniable sense of poetic justice. One evening, a phone call interrupted my thoughts. It was a mutual friend. Denise, have you heard the latest about Gary? I paused. No, what happened? He's leaving town. He lost his job and his house. He's pretty much destitute. A complex emotion stirred within me, not quite satisfaction, but something close. Gary had sown seeds of destruction in his pursuit against me, but ultimately, he was the one who unraveled. After hanging up, I gazed at a picture of my children on the mantel. This fight had been for them, for their future and security. That night, as I tucked them into bed, a deep sense of peace washed over me. The battle was over, and we had come out stronger, free from Gary's shadow, and ready for a new chapter. Life would be different, but we were together, and that was all that mattered. In the months following the court ruling, life found a new rhythm. The victory brought closure, yet it marked the beginning of a new journey of healing and rebuilding. I decided to sell our old house, which held too many bitter memories. Each item I packed was a step further from my past with Gary. I was committed to building a better future for Amanda and Andrew. One day, while sorting through old boxes in the attic, I found a photo of Gary and me during happier times. For a moment, I allowed myself to grieve for the life I thought we had, for the love I once believed was real. But as I looked at his face in the photo, I realized that the man I had married no longer existed. He had shown his true colors, dark and unpleasant. With a decisive motion, I tossed the photo into the trash, a symbolic act of letting go. Moving to a new town brought us a fresh start. I found a cozy home in a welcoming neighborhood, and the kids quickly made friends at their new school. I immersed myself in my writing, finding solace in the worlds I created. One evening, as I was tucking Amanda into bed, she looked up at me with her big, innocent eyes and asked, "Mom, do you miss Dad?" The question caught me off guard. "Sometimes I miss who I thought your dad was," I said softly, "but we're better off now." It was true. Despite everything, we had found a way to move forward, stronger and more united. "We're a strong team, just the three of us," I added, and she nodded with a maturity beyond her years. "I like it here, Mom. I like our new home," she said, her words warming my heart. We had come a long way. As I lay in bed that night, my thoughts turned to Gary's downfall. His greed and malice had backfired, leaving him with nothing. While I took no joy in his misfortune, there was a sense of justice in the outcome. The road ahead for the kids and me would be long, but we were finally on a path to healing. With the inheritance securely invested, I knew it would provide for their education and their future needs. I closed my eyes, thinking of my mother. Her strength and foresight had been our salvation. In her wisdom, she had given me the means to protect myself and my children. As I drifted off to sleep, I felt a profound peace. The storm that had once threatened to uproot our lives had passed, leaving clarity and hope in its wake. We had weathered the worst, and now, with a new day dawning, it felt like anything was possible. I stared at the email on my screen, reading it for the 5th time, even though each word felt like a knife twisting deeper into my chest. Subject: Training Transition. Effective immediately from Marcus Peterson, CEO to Sarah Mitchell, Head of Operations. Sarah, starting Monday, you'll begin transitioning your responsibilities to Kevin Peterson. Over the next month, ensure he's fully trained on all operational aspects. Your last day will be October 15th. This decision is final. Best, Marcus, 15 years. I've given this company 15 years of my life. Worked my way up from junior analyst to head of operations. Built the systems that had transformed Davidson and Mills from a struggling regional player into an industry leader. And now I was being replaced by the CEO's 26-year-old nephew, whose biggest achievement was managing not to flunk out of business school. My hands shook as I closed my laptop. Through the glass walls of my office, I could see Kevin lounging at his desk, feet propped up, watching something on his phone. He'd been here 3 months as a management trainee, contributing nothing except endless complaints about the coffee quality and our outdated dress code. "Come in," I called out at the knock on my door, quickly wiping my eyes. Marcus Peterson himself stood in the doorway, his expensive suit and carefully styled gray hair a stark contrast to the smirk on his face. "Sarah, got my email, I assume." He settled into one of my visitor chairs without waiting for an invitation. "Look, I know this might seem sudden, but Kevin needs this opportunity. He's family, and family comes first." "Marcus," I kept my voice steady, professional. "The Miller merger is in final stages. The new inventory system rollout starts next week. The key 4 projections." He waved his hand dismissively. "Kevin will handle all that. Just make sure you train him properly. He spends half his day on TikTok." The words burst out before I could stop them. "He doesn't understand basic operations, let alone complex merger integrations. This could sink the company." Marcus's face hardened. "Careful, Sarah. Don't make this personal. Kevin has fresh ideas, new perspectives. Frankly, we need some young blood around here. Someone who understands modern business." "Modern business?" I laughed bitterly. "Like what?" "His suggestion to invest our emergency fund in Dogecoin." "That's enough." Marcus stood, his fake friendly demeanor vanishing. "Train Kevin, clear out your office, get your severance, or leave now with nothing. Your choice." As he stormed out, I saw Kevin watching through the glass, not even trying to hide his smirk. My severance package sat unopened on my desk. 2 months' pay for 15 years of service. The injustice of it burned in my throat. What Marcus didn't know, what no one knew, was that I'd been preparing for something like this for years. Not this exactly, but I'd seen too many talented people pushed out, replaced by Marcus's endless parade of incompetent relatives and golf buddies. I'd watched him slowly destroy everything we built, all while padding his own pockets and his family's positions. So I'd started buying stock. Small amounts at first, whenever I could afford it, then larger chunks when my investments in other areas paid off. Always through different brokers, different entities. For 3 years, I'd been the mysterious investor steadily acquiring shares, keeping just under the disclosure threshold. Last week, when rumors of Kevin's promotion started circulating, I'd made my final move. One last major purchase, carefully timed and structured. The paperwork was probably sitting on the board secretary's desk right now, waiting to be processed. I opened my desk drawer and pulled out a small leather portfolio. Inside was a single document, proof of my controlling interest in Davidson and Mills, now at 51%. Obtained through careful planning, smart investing, and a lot of patience. Marcus thought he was forcing me to train my replacement. In reality, I was about to become his boss. The quarterly board meeting was in 2 days. Marcus had no idea that while he was busy pushing me out, I'd been quietly taking control of his company. He thought Kevin needed an opportunity. Well, I was about to give everyone a masterclass in real modern business. I picked up my phone and dialed a number I'd saved months ago. "Mr. Harrison, Sarah Mitchell. About that board seat we discussed. I'm ready to accept." The next morning, I arrived early. The office was quiet, most people wouldn't be in for another hour. I needed this time to prepare, to steady my nerves. The document confirming my controlling interest felt heavy in my bag. I walked past my office, soon to be Kevin's office, according to Marcus's grand plans, and headed to the conference room. Started setting up my presentation, the one I'd been perfecting for months. The one that would detail every questionable decision, every nepotistic hire, every financial misstep Marcus had made over the past 5 years. Bit early for a terminated employee, isn't it? I turned to find Marcus in the doorway, coffee in hand, looking smug. Board meetings not for hours, and it's closed session anyway. No need for any last-minute presentations. Actually, I smiled, feeling surprisingly calm. I have every right to be here. In fact, I need to prepare. It's my first meeting as majority shareholder. The coffee cup slipped from his hand, splattering across the carpet. What did you say? I slid the document across the table. 51%, Marcus. Through completely legal, properly documented stock purchases over the past 3 years. You were so busy watching your nephew's TikToks, you never noticed who was buying up your company. His face went from red to white as he scanned the paperwork. This is impossible. You can't afford. You're just an employee. I finished for him. You never did bother to acknowledge my contributions properly. My bonuses, my stock options, I invested every penny. While you were busy installing your family members in cushy positions, I was quietly becoming your boss. The sound of voices in the hallway made him jump. Other early arrivals starting their day, unaware of the drama unfolding in the conference room. You can't do this, he whispered, but his voice had lost all its previous authority. The board will be very interested in my presentation today, especially the part about the money you've been funneling to your brother's fake consulting company. Or should we discuss Kevin's proposed Dogecoin investment first? He gripped the back of a chair, knuckles white. What do you want? Want? I logged into my laptop, pulled up my presentation. I want to run this company properly, Marcus. No more nepotism. No more questionable financial decisions. No more pushing out talented people to make room for your relatives. I'll resign, he offered quickly. Just name your price. I almost laughed at how quickly he turned to bribery. Oh, I don't want your resignation yet. First, you're going to sit through this board meeting. You're going to watch as I detail every mistake you've made. Then you're going to experience what it feels like to be at someone else's mercy. The irony wasn't lost on me. Here he was, begging to keep his job, just like I had yesterday. But unlike him, I wasn't going to enjoy his humiliation. This wasn't about revenge. It was about fixing what he'd broken. The board members will be here soon, I said, checking my watch. Why don't you get yourself together? It's going to be a long meeting. As he stumbled out, I saw Kevin arriving, sauntering toward what he thought would be his new office. He had no idea that his cushy promotion was about to evaporate, along with all of Marcus's authority to grant it. I'd worked 15 years to build this company into something special. Now I had the power to protect it, and everyone else Marcus had tried to push aside. The board meeting was about to change everything, and I was ready. The boardroom filled slowly. I recognized most of the faces. Elderly men in expensive suits who'd rubber-stamped Marcus's decisions for years. They barely glanced at me as they took their seats, probably assuming I was there to take notes or serve coffee. Marcus sat at the head of the table, his usual confidence replaced by a sickly pallor. His brother James, Kevin's father, and another board member kept shooting him concerned looks. I noticed Marcus hadn't warned him about what was coming. Before we begin, Marcus's voice cracked slightly. There's been a development. Ms. Mitchell has some information to share. All eyes turned to me, most expressions ranging from confused to annoyed. James Peterson actually checked his watch. Thank you, Marcus. I stood, placing my documents on the table. As of yesterday, I am the majority shareholder of Davidson and Mills, holding 51% of voting shares. The reaction was immediate. James Peterson jumped to his feet, face red. That's impossible. Where would you get that kind of money? I smiled, sliding copies of my documentation to each board member. 15 years of bonuses, stock options, and smart investments. Every purchase properly documented and legally executed. You can verify with your own attorneys, but I assure you it's ironclad. This is absurd, James sputtered. Marcus, do something. But Marcus just stared at the table, knowing what was coming next. Now let's discuss some concerning patterns I've observed. I continued pulling up my presentation, starting with the $2.3 million in consulting fees paid to Peterson Analytics last year. James went pale. His consulting company, the one that had never produced a single report or deliverable. Or perhaps we should examine the 7 executive positions currently held by Peterson family members, none of whom met the minimum qualifications for their roles. I clicked through slides showing their resumes or lack thereof, including the recent attempt to install Kevin Peterson as head of operations, despite his complete lack of relevant experience. The other board members were flipping through my documentation now, their expressions darkening as they realized the extent of the nepotism and mismanagement. This ends today, I stated firmly. I'm implementing immediate changes to protect this company's future. What followed was the most intense 3 hours of my life. I detailed every questionable decision, every wasteful expenditure, every instance of nepotism that had weakened our company. The board members, many of whom had dozed through previous meetings, were now fully engaged. By the time I finished, the mood in the room had shifted dramatically. These men might have been Marcus's golf buddies, but they were also businessmen who'd invested heavily in Davidson and Mills. They couldn't ignore the evidence of mismanagement I presented. I moved for an immediate vote of no confidence in Marcus Peterson as CEO. Richard Harrison, our oldest board member, announced. Others quickly seconded. Marcus finally found his voice. You can't do this. This company has been in my family for 3 generations. I cut in, and you've nearly destroyed it with your nepotism and mismanagement. The vote, gentlemen? It was unanimous. Even James, seeing which way the wind was blowing, voted to remove his own brother as CEO. Ms. Mitchell, Harrison turned to me. Given your controlling interest and evident understanding of this company's operations, I move to appoint you as interim CEO. All in favor? Another unanimous vote. Marcus slumped in his chair, defeated. My first act as CEO, I announced, is to terminate the employment of all unqualified executives, effective immediately. Mr. James Peterson, your consulting contract is also terminated. Security will escort you to clear out your offices. As if on cue, security appeared at the door. I'd arranged this days ago, knowing how the meeting would end. You can't just throw us out, James protested. We built this company. No, I corrected him. The employees you exploited built this company, the ones you pushed aside to make room for your family members. That ends now. As security led them out, I could hear Kevin in the hallway, his voice rising in protest as he realized his cushy future had evaporated. The remaining board members stayed to discuss transition plans. I already had a list of qualified internal candidates to promote into the vacant executive positions. Talented people who'd been overlooked in favor of Marcus's relatives. That evening, I sat in my office, my real office now, the CEO's corner suite, reviewing personnel files. A knock at the door interrupted my work. Come in, I called, surprised to see Marcus standing there. Security must have let him up for one last visit. I underestimated you, he said quietly. All these years I thought you were just another employee, someone I could push around, replace when convenient. That was your mistake, I replied. You saw people as tools to use and discard. I saw them as the heart of this company. He nodded slowly. The board approved your reorganization plan. James is furious, threatening to sue, but we both know he won't. Too much would come out in discovery. Was there something you wanted, Marcus? Besides stating the obvious, he pulled an envelope from his jacket. My formal resignation. I assumed you were going to demand it anyway. I took the envelope, not bothering to open it. You know what the real difference between us is, Marcus? You saw this company as your family's property, something to exploit. I saw it as a responsibility to our employees, our customers, our community. And now it's all yours, he said bitterly. No, I corrected him. Now it belongs to everyone who works here, everyone who earns their position through merit, not nepotism. That's the company I'm going to build. After he left, I walked through the quiet office. Most employees had gone home, but a few lights still burned at distant desks, dedicated people staying late to finish projects, unaware that their workplace was about to transform. Tomorrow would bring big changes. My first company-wide memo was already drafted, announcing the restructuring and new opportunities for internal advancement. The qualified employees Marcus had overlooked would finally get their chance to shine. My phone buzzed. A text from my mother. Saw the company announcement, CEO. Why didn't you tell me? I smiled, remembering all the times I'd wanted to share my plan but couldn't risk it leaking. Mom had taught me the value of patience, of working quietly toward your goals while others underestimated you. Never let them see you coming, she always said. Well, they hadn't seen me coming, and now Davidson and Mills would become the company it should have been all along. I glanced at the brass nameplate on my desk. Sarah Mitchell, Chief Executive Officer. It had a nice ring to it. Somewhere across town, Marcus was probably drowning his sorrows, wondering how his just an employee had outmaneuvered him so completely. Kevin was likely updating his LinkedIn profile, discovering that his primary qualification, being Marcus's nephew, suddenly carried a lot less weight. But I wasn't thinking about them. I was thinking about tomorrow, about the changes I would implement, the careers I would help build, the company culture I would transform. Marcus had tried to force me to train my replacement. Instead, I'd replaced him. Sometimes karma works out perfectly. The next morning, I arrived early again. Old habits die hard. But this time, instead of preparing for battle, I was preparing to rebuild. The company-wide email went out at 8 a.m. sharp. Dear colleagues, today marks a new chapter for Davidson and Mills. Merit, not connections, will determine advancement. Hard work, not nepotism, will shape our future. I know many of you have felt overlooked, undervalued, held back by an old system that prized relationships over results. That ends now. In the coming weeks, all executive positions will be open to internal applications. Every employee will have a fair chance to advance based on their qualifications and contributions. This is your company too. Let's build something extraordinary together. Best regards, Sarah Mitchell, Chief Executive Officer. The responses started flooding in immediately. Messages of congratulation, of hope, of relief that things were finally changing. But my favorite came from Janet in accounting, who'd been passed over for promotion 3 times in favor of Marcus's golf buddies. Thank you for showing us that sometimes justice wins. When can I apply for CFO? I smiled and typed back, applications open Monday. May the best candidate win. Marcus had taught me an unintended lesson. If you want something done right, sometimes you have to take over the whole company to do it. Lesson learned, Marcus. Lesson learned.
Hey everyone, it's June. My husband Gabrielle and I are collaborating on this story, but before we dive in, I need to share a rather unpleasant experience. My first encounter with Gabrielle's parents, Louise and Lena. Let me fill you in on what they had to say. Brace yourselves. I can't believe you date someone like Gabrielle, a real underachiever. This woman has no redeeming qualities. She merely works a desk job in a small office. How on earth will she provide us with a good life? Mom, I love June, and she's the only one for me. I don't care about her income or job. I never cared about those things. Well, we care, Gabrielle. We've made that clear from the start. If you paid any attention, you'd know. Listen, Gabrielle, if this girl doesn't bring more to the table, she can't be our daughter-in-law. We won't approve. Find someone else. No, Mom, June is the one for me. I'm going to marry her. I had the entire proposal planned, and now you've ruined everything. I was stunned as this conversation unfolded. Yes, I was surprised about Gabrielle planning to propose. We had been dating for 3 years, and while I hoped for a proposal, I didn't expect it to happen so soon. However, what left me truly shocked was Louise and Lena's alarming behavior toward our relationship. Gabrielle had warned me about them, saying, June, I've met your dad. He's great. But let me be clear, my parents are not good people. I was naive, not comprehending how cruel and selfish parents could be. While Gabrielle financially supported his parents, he distanced himself from them, revealing that they were motivated by greed, always pushing him to marry rich. The day I met his parents, I realized how true his words were. Despite their protests, Gabrielle proposed, and we got married. Although Louise and Lena threatened to boycott the wedding, they eventually attended, thanks to Gabrielle's desperate pleas. He didn't have much family on his side and wanted them there, even though they made it clear they didn't approve. I later discovered that Gabrielle had convinced them to attend by portraying my family as financially stable. While they reluctantly came, their motives were evident. They made it a point to remind me, just so you know, June, we still don't approve of this marriage. Gabrielle is a successful man, and we expected more from him. He really disappointed us by not marrying rich. We wouldn't have come if we thought you had nothing. Thank God your father at least has something to his name. I hope you don't forget us and our gracious presence today when you finally get the house inheritance. Guys, I'm getting married today. My father is healthy and fine. and there's absolutely no reason for you two to even mention an inheritance today." I stormed off, distancing myself from them after hearing their audacious remark. My father was my only living family, and hearing such comments on my wedding day made me sick. I couldn't believe the audacity of Louis and Lena to demand a share of my money. I chose not to inform Gabriel about this incident, not wanting to spoil his day, and knowing how difficult it was for him to cut ties with his parents. Unfortunately, things took a downward turn from there. Despite Gabriel and I being happy together, his parents were always meddling in our finances. Louis and Lena persistently pestered us about the exact worth of my father's assets. We never gave them a satisfactory answer, yet their embarrassing and entitled behavior continued. For years, I endured their greedy ways, putting up with their constant demands for more money. They fabricated excuses and guilt-tripped us when we tried to refuse. Their comments about my inheritance never ceased, but I chose to ignore them. The situation hit rock bottom when my father was diagnosed with aggressive cancer, and his time was limited. Living far away, we flew to visit him a couple of times. Louis and Lena were displeased, saying we shouldn't waste money on frequent visits since my father was in hospice and wouldn't live long anyway. I vehemently disagreed, asserting that visiting my dying father was not a waste of money. What we did with our finances was our choice, and Louis and Lena had no right to dictate. Their lack of support and covert requests not to visit my father infuriated me. Thankfully, Gabriel stood up for me and shut down their insensitive conversation. From that day onwards, I was determined to teach them a lesson once I was in a better place. I vowed to show them their place. My father passed away around 3 months after his diagnosis, and I was devastated. I really didn't want to lose him that fast. Witnessing his declining health, I knew it was time. Despite the difficulty, Gabriel was my rock throughout the entire time. He held my hand while I flew to my father's town to arrange his funeral. Louis and Lena were only blowing up my phone, demanding to know about my inheritance and how much I planned to spend on the funeral. I was disgusted with those messages, and so was Gabriel. However, we didn't do anything at the time, both agreeing that they would be served their just desserts after we returned home from the funeral. As predicted, Louis and Lena showed up as soon as Gabriel and I returned home. After entering the house, they started to hound us with questions. So the funeral is finally over. God, I've been dying to know what you got in the inheritance. Your father must have left you the house. What are you even talking about, Lena? How does my inheritance concern you in any way? I just came back from my father's funeral, and this is what you ask. Oh, please, June, don't be such a spoiled sport. Ever since Gabriel married you, we've been wondering why he did it. I mean, you don't have a great job, and neither are you beautiful. What did he ever see in you? Me and Louis guessed that it must be because of money. Mom, what is wrong with you? How can you even insult me and my wife like that? We married each other for love. I have told you this countless times. At least have the decency not to bring it up today. Gabriel, there's no reason to be so dramatic. We're simply asking her a question. Your wife can just answer us and satisfy our curiosity. We don't mind if you marry June for money. In fact, we would be happy to know that you've bagged the great prize. You are truly horrible parents to accuse your own son of being a gold digger. You two are insane. I wonder how a great man like Gabriel was born to such disgusting people. Enough with the small talk, June. Tell us what you got in your inheritance. This is the day I was waiting for. Your father must have left you something. Gabriel told me that he lived in a big house. You could just tell now and buy us a house instead. We will make great use of the money. Besides, we are your parents now. Hearing this made my blood boil, and I seethed with rage while Gabriel looked at his parents in disbelief. Even he couldn't comprehend the fact that his parents could be so greedy and selfish. My father wasn't even dead for a month, and they were already planning to spend my inheritance on themselves. Hell, they even started to call themselves my new parents. At that point, I knew I had to do something. For years, I had put up with them for Gabriel's sake. But today was the day for a change. I wanted to show Gabriel just how bad his parents were, I said. Actually, my dad didn't have the house in his name when he died. I'm sorry to tell you that he did own that house for a long time, but he had to let it go for reasons. What? So you're telling us that your father didn't even own his house anymore? No, like I said, he owned it a long time ago. He had to let go of the house very recently, so no, I did not get the house or any inheritance, as they say. Oh my God, so your father was a poor man after all. I knew you were too cheap to be wealthy. Your father couldn't even keep his house till the end. That poor man died with no house under his name. Leave our son, as you're good for nothing. Mom, our marriage isn't over just because she didn't get an inheritance. You can't just ask her to leave me because of a stupid reason like that. Don't speak over us, Gabriel. We won't allow you to continue this marriage anymore. You have disappointed us by marrying into a poor family. You didn't once think about how you could keep your parents happy. I'm ashamed to have a son like you. June, I'm sure you must have trapped my son into marrying you. People like you can use cheap tricks to lure men. Your final plan was to cut us off and enjoy my son's money alone. Well, guess what, June? I won't let that happen. Louis and Lena started to harass Gabriel to give me a divorce and leave. They told him that he should marry a rich girl so that my in-laws could live the life of luxury they always wanted. Gabriel was getting upset and started to break down. I knew that I had to take the opportunity to help him make a decision. Gabriel, are you going to let your parents do this to us? I have put up with their gold-digging ways for a long time now. I didn't open my mouth because you felt guilty cutting them off. Are you still going to continue to keep them in our life? I don't think we can come back from this. June, I've had enough as well. Mom, Dad, today you have shown me just how bad you are. For years, you have used me to fulfill your dreams. I won't tolerate this anymore. Don't be stupid, Gabriel. This girl would influence you and take you away from your family. We are doing this for your own good as well. We didn't spend money on you so that you can go do charity for someone else. You need to divorce your wife and start afresh. There is still time for you to get a rich wife. We will help you. This time you have made too many mistakes on your own. No, I won't leave my wife because she didn't get an inheritance. I'm done being a puppet in your hands. I will stay with June. You two won't be allowed in my life anymore. What will you do by keeping June in your life? This is not what we ever wanted. She's totally unworthy of you. If you stay in this marriage, we don't want anything to do with you anymore. We won't help you when she robs you and leaves you destitute. Seeing Lena and Louis's horrible behavior, I finally decided to reveal the truth to them. I knew that telling them about my true net worth would make them beg and plead at my feet. I wanted to go all out on them. I wanted Gabriel not to regret his decision in any way, so I said, there will be no need for that, guys. I don't need to rob Gabriel and take his money. I have plenty of money on my own, and I will take care of Gabriel just fine without your help. Look who's talking. You don't have to lie to us to make yourself look better, June. We know the truth. Yes, the truth is that you are the daughter of a poor man, and you don't work a good enough job to make lots of money. In a few months, you will go after Gabriel's money once you are destitute. Well, actually, I am not a poor man's daughter. I have 50 million in my bank account. No, I didn't earn it from my job. Rather, I got it from my father. That is impossible. Your father didn't have anything in his name. You said that yourself. Don't try to fool us, June. We can see through your lies. It won't work for us. We will make sure you divorce our son and leave him to us. I smiled at them and then looked at Gabriel. He was still looking very upset, but gave me the signal to go ahead. He knew me inside out, and so he knew what was coming. I opened my bank account and showed them my bank balance. Louis and Lena took one look at it, and their eyebrows shot up to the sky. They looked at each other and said, "No, no, no, this is impossible. You must have fabricated these bank statements. You said you didn't get an inheritance. How? You even said that your father didn't own his house till the end. Where did this money come from?" What I didn't tell you was the fact that my father owned a big ranch where he lived. He sold the ranch and the house before he died. He gave me an early inheritance before signing himself into hospice. He didn't want me to use my own money for his care. He wasn't like you too. Louis and Lena couldn't believe what they saw. Even my words didn't sound true to them. So they asked Gabriel for the truth. When he confirmed what they saw, they went quiet for a minute and looked at each other again. Then suddenly, they changed their tune completely and said, "Oh, this is such great news. Here I was thinking that my son made a huge mistake. You should have told us sooner about your money." "Yeah, we got riled up for nothing. Your father did well for yourself, June. I'm sure you'll make good use of that money. Now, like I said, we're like your own parents. Since this issue has been solved, there's no need for you to leave, Gabriel. You should have said something to us. We doubted your capabilities for nothing. You did marry well, son. I'm so happy today." With the expression Gabriel was making, I knew that my work was done. He would take care of the rest, so I held back my cuss words and let him do the talking. I trusted my husband to make the right choices, and he didn't disappoint me. Gabriel was fuming and started to scream at his parents. He said, "You still have the audacity to stand here and keep talking to us. Hell, how do you still expect June to pay for your comfort? You were hounding us to get divorced, and now you suddenly claim that she's family. How could you do this? We didn't know her net worth back then, Gabriel. She hid the truth from us. How are we supposed to know that she's actually rich? Yeah, June, we'd apologize for assuming the worst. You did surprise us. Anyway, now that you have an apology, can we move past this already?" "No, absolutely not. There is no way I'm forgiving you two for what you did today. I just got back from burying my father, and you two didn't even let me grieve in peace. I will never forget or forgive this. I think it has been enough already. Since you two think so lowly of me, there is no reason for me to keep you in my life. Today, I will protect myself and my wife from your toxic selves. Get out of my house and don't even think about coming back. From next month onwards, you are on your own. I won't be helping you out financially anymore. You don't deserve any kind of help after today." After Gabriel said that, Louise and Lena went absolutely ballistic on us. They also kept begging us and pleading with us not to cut them off. Neither Gabriel nor I paid any attention to their requests. In fact, Gabriel was so mad that he threatened to call the police if they did not leave our house. Soon after they heard the threats, both Louis and Lena left our property but continued to blow up our phones with calls and texts. We blocked their number before reminding them that we will press charges if they don't stop harassing us. For the next few days, Gabriel completely dealt with his family while I grieved my father properly. I was finally in a peaceful setting where I could reflect on my childhood memories and try to remember my father for the good times. He truly was an amazing man. As soon as he understood that I didn't want to move back south, he sold his property so that I didn't have to worry about it. He didn't even want me to spend money on his medical bills, so he used some of the sale money to pay for hospice. He was truly a great parent, and I still miss him a lot. On the other hand, Gabriel was also grieving the loss of his family, but for other reasons. Yes, he was finally freed from his toxic family, but some people were guilting him about abandoning them. Those people did stop hounding him when Gabriel told them the full story. Now, everyone who knows Louis and Lena is disgusted with them. The duo still tried to contact us even after we blocked their numbers and changed our locks. We are contemplating taking out restraining orders if they don't stop soon. Meanwhile, I have recently found out that I am pregnant. I'm sad that my father couldn't be a part of my child's life, but me and Gabriel are really enjoying this surprise and preparing ourselves to have a little bundle of joy in our arms soon.
Hi, I'm Jessica Chen, and this is the story of how my husband's wealthy family learned that money isn't everything, especially when you underestimate the wrong person. I met Marcus at a small coffee shop where I worked while pursuing my computer engineering degree. He was different from the usual suited executives who barely looked at me while ordering their expensive lattes. Despite coming from one of the city's wealthiest families, Marcus would sit at the counter and actually talk to me about technology, coding, and my dreams of starting my own software company. "You're different," he said one day, watching me debug code on my laptop during my break. "Most people here just see me as the heir to Wong Enterprises. You see me as just Marcus." I smiled, closing my laptop. "That's because money doesn't impress me. Ideas do, dreams do." A romance blossomed naturally, hidden from his family's judgmental eyes. Marcus knew they wouldn't approve. They had a list of suitable heiresses for him to choose from. But love doesn't follow present paths. When Marcus finally told his parents about us, the explosion was nuclear. A coffee shop girl with a community college degree, his mother, Eleanor Wong, practically spat the words during our first dinner together. She sat at the head of their massive dining table, wearing jewelry that probably cost more than my entire education. "Actually, I'm completing my computer engineering degree," I corrected her politely. "And it's a state university, not a community college." "Same difference," she dismissed with a wave of her manicured hand. "Marcus needs someone who understands our world, our social obligations, not some scholarship case." Marcus squeezed my hand under the table. "Mother Jessica is brilliant. She's developing innovative software that could revolutionize." "Enough." Harold Wong, Marcus's father, slammed his hand on the table. "No son of mine will marry beneath his station. End this foolishness now." But Marcus didn't end it. Instead, he proposed the next day, and we had a small private ceremony at City Hall. His parents refused to attend. "You'll regret this," Eleanor warned him. "She'll show her true colors soon enough." Despite his family's disapproval, we were happy. Marcus supported my studies while I finished my degree, and I started developing my software on the side. We lived in a modest apartment, avoiding his family's social circles and focusing on building our life together. Then I got pregnant. The news should have been joyous. Instead, it set off a chain of events that would change everything. "A baby changes things," Eleanor announced, suddenly appearing at our door one day when Marcus was at work. Perhaps we were hasty in our judgment. She invited us to move into the family mansion. Marcus was thrilled, seeing it as a chance to reconcile with his family. I was hesitant, but I wanted our child to know their grandparents. So we moved in. That's when the real nightmare began. Eleanor's acceptance was a carefully crafted trap. She began hosting elaborate parties, parading me in front of their social circle like a circus act. "Isn't it charming?" she'd say. "Our Marcus, so charitable, giving a chance to someone from her background." I endured it all for Marcus's sake, but then I overheard a conversation that chilled me to my core. "The girl is becoming a problem," Eleanor told Harold in his study. "She's actually trying to patent some software she's developed. Imagine the embarrassment if Marcus's wife starts peddling computer programs like a street vendor." "The prenup will protect Marcus's interests," Harold assured her. "And once the baby is born—" "Yes," Eleanor's voice turned cold. "Once we have our grandchild, we can deal with the gold digger appropriately." I rushed back to our room, heart pounding. The next day, I discovered they'd been working behind the scenes. My patent application had been mysteriously delayed. My university records showed an investigation into academic irregularities. They were systematically destroying my credibility. When I confronted Marcus, his response shattered my world. "You're being paranoid, Jessica," he sighed, not looking up from his phone. "Pregnancy hormones are making you irrational. Mother is trying her best to welcome you into our world. Your mother is trying to destroy me," I shouted, showing him the patent interference documents I'd uncovered. "Those are just standard legal procedures," he dismissed. "Maybe if you'd stop trying to prove yourself and just accept your place in this family." "My place?" I whispered, finally seeing him clearly. "You mean beneath you? Like your mother always said." Before he could respond, Eleanor burst into the room, waving her tablet. "How dare you?" she shrieked. "Arguing with my son in his own home. Causing him stress with your wild accusations?" What happened next seemed to unfold in slow motion. Eleanor clutched her chest dramatically, stumbling. "My heart? The stress. She's trying to kill me." Marcus rushed to his mother while Harold appeared from nowhere, pointing at me with rage. "Get out. Get out of this house now." "Marcus," I pleaded, but he wouldn't even look at me, too busy attending to his mother's theatrical performance. Security guards appeared, escorting me out with just my purse and the clothes on my back. As the massive doors slammed behind me, I heard Eleanor's miraculous recovery, her voice carrying clearly. Finally. Now we can protect our grandchild from that gold digger's influence. I stood there, 5 months pregnant, watching the sun set behind the mansion I foolishly thought could become my home. But I wasn't broken. I was angry. What they didn't know was that I'd seen this coming. I'd been preparing, and I had an ace up my sleeve, one that would make them regret ever underestimating the coffee shop girl. As I walked away from the mansion, my phone buzzed with a text message that would change everything. Ms. Chen, this is David Zhang, Marcus's business partner. We need to talk. There's something you should know about Wang Enterprises and your software. Standing there, one hand on my belly where my baby grew, I smiled. They thought they'd won, but the game was just beginning. The next morning would bring revelations that would shake the Wang family to its core. That night, I met David Zhang at a small, discreet restaurant downtown. Unlike the Wang family's usual flashy establishments, this was a quiet place where serious conversations could happen without interruption. David was already waiting when I arrived, his usually immaculate suit slightly rumpled, suggesting he'd come straight from the office. He stood as I approached, pulling out a chair for me. "Thank you for meeting me, Jessica," he said, his expression grave. "I've been wanting to talk to you for months, but the Wangs, they have eyes everywhere." I sat down carefully, one hand protectively on my baby bump. "What's this about, Mr. Zhang? And why now?" He pulled out a tablet, sliding it across the table. "Take a look at this. It might seem familiar." My heart stopped as I scrolled through the documents. On the screen was my software, the project I'd been working on for years. But it wasn't just my code. It had been modified, expanded, and was now being prepared for launch as Wang Enterprises' newest product. "They stole my work," I whispered, anger building in my chest. David nodded grimly. "Not just stole it. They've built their entire new digital division around your framework. That standard legal procedure blocking your patent? It was so they could file their own patent first. But how did they?" I stopped, realization dawning. "Marcus. He had access to my laptop, my files." "Marcus is just a puppet." David leaned forward, lowering his voice. "Eleanor and Harold have been running the company into the ground with outdated strategies. They needed a win. Your software was their salvation, but they couldn't bear the thought of owing their success to the coffee shop girl." I remembered all the times Marcus had asked about my project, showing sudden interest in the technical details. How Eleanor had insisted I use the superior computer in their home office. They'd been gathering my work piece by piece. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked David. "You're their business partner." He smiled grimly. "Partner? More like their latest target. I built the Asian market division from nothing. Now that it's profitable, they're trying to push me out too. Just like they did to you." He pulled out another document, a contract. "But I've got something they don't know about. 20 years ago, Harold's father gave me special voting shares. In writing. If combined with other shareholders, these shares could force a board review." My mind raced with possibilities. "And what do you want from me?" "Justice," he said simply. "Your software is revolutionary, Jessica. But they're implementing it wrong. Their shortcuts will make it vulnerable. When it fails, and it will fail, thousands of businesses will be compromised." I sat back, processing this information. "So you want to stop them?" "I want to help you take back what's yours," he corrected. "And in the process, maybe we can save Wang Enterprises from itself." Over the next few hours, David laid out everything. The Wang family's perfect image was a facade. Their fortune was built on taking credit for others' innovations. My software wasn't the first thing they'd stolen, just the most recent. "There's more," David said, pulling out one final document. "Remember that prenup they made you sign? The one Marcus said was just a formality?" I nodded, my throat tight. "It has a clause about intellectual property. Any IP developed during the marriage belongs to both parties equally. When they stole your software, they actually gave you a legal claim to half of its value." I laughed bitterly. "They'll have the best lawyers in the country." "Yes," David smiled. "But we have something better. We have proof." And he paused dramatically. "We have your backup files." My head snapped up. "What?" "That day you came to my office 6 months ago to discuss cloud storage solutions, I noticed you uploaded something to a secure server. I've kept it safe. untouched, original timestamps intact. Tears welled in my eyes as I remembered. I'd been so careful, so paranoid about backing up my work. That paranoia had just saved me. Here's what we're going to do, David continued, outlining a plan that would make Eleanor's head spin. But we need to move fast. They're announcing the software launch at the annual shareholders meeting next week. I placed both hands on my belly, feeling my baby kick as if in agreement. I'm ready. The next week was a blur of preparation. David's lawyers worked around the clock, preparing documents. Tech experts analyzed my original code against Wong Enterprises' stolen version, documenting every theft. But the real masterstroke came from an unexpected source. Mrs. Wong. A timid voice called me 3 days before the shareholders' meeting. It was Amy, Eleanor's personal assistant. I have something you should see. She handed me a USB drive, hands shaking. I've worked for Mrs. Wong for 15 years. The things I've seen, the people she's destroyed. I can't do it anymore. Everything's on here. Every email, every hidden document, every secret meeting. I knew it must have cost her to do this. Thank you, Amy. Just... She hesitated at the door. Make it count. The morning of the shareholders' meeting dawned bright and clear. I dressed carefully in a conservative black maternity dress, my hair pulled back professionally. David met me at his office. Ready? He asked, helping me out of the car. I nodded, squaring my shoulders. More than ready. As we walked into Wong Enterprises headquarters, employees stopped and stared. News of my dramatic exit from the Wong mansion had spread. No one expected to see me here. We rode the elevator to the top floor, where the boardroom was already filling with shareholders. Through the glass walls, I could see Eleanor holding court, Marcus at her side like an obedient schoolboy. The moment we walked in, silence fell. Security. Eleanor shrieked, half rising from her chair. Remove this woman immediately. I wouldn't do that, David's voice cut through the room. Not unless you want to explain to the shareholders why you're removing someone who owns half of today's big announcement. Harold's face turned purple. What nonsense is this? I stepped forward, my voice clear and steady. Before you launch my software as your own, perhaps we should discuss the original source code and the rather interesting emails planning its theft. Marcus went pale. Eleanor's perfectly made-up face contorted with rage. But before they could speak, the screens around the room flickered to life. Side-by-side comparisons of my original code and their stolen version appeared. Emails detailing their plan to block my patent. Security footage of Marcus copying files from my laptop late at night. And finally Eleanor's own voice. Once we have the code, get rid of the girl. Marcus can find a suitable wife later. The software is what matters. The room erupted in chaos. But I wasn't done yet. As chaos erupted in the boardroom, Eleanor tried to regain control. These are obviously fabricated documents, she shouted over the murmuring shareholders. This woman is trying to extort our family. I smiled calmly, remembering all the times she dismissed me as just a coffee shop girl. Fabricated? I pressed a button on my tablet. Like these surveillance videos from your home office? The ones showing Marcus copying my files at your direction. The screens switched to crystal clear footage. Eleanor's face went from red to white as she watched herself instructing Marcus, pointing at my laptop. Or perhaps, I continued, these bank transfers, the ones showing payments to delay my patent application. Emmy kept very detailed records, Mrs. Wong. At the mention of her assistant's name, Eleanor's composure cracked completely. You treacherous little. Mother, stop. Marcus finally spoke up, but I cut him off. No, Marcus, you don't get to play peacemaker now. Not after what you did. I turned to address the shareholders directly. Ladies and gentlemen, you're about to vote on launching a software platform that was stolen from its original creator, me. A platform that, due to rushed and improper implementation, has critical security flaws. David stepped forward, distributing documents to the board members. Our technical team has identified 17 major vulnerabilities in their current version. If launched, it would expose client data to significant risks. One of the older board members, a distinguished woman I recognize as Patricia Chen, no relation, stood up. Mr. Zhang, are you vouching for these claims? I am, David replied firmly, and I'm exercising my special voting rights to call for an immediate leadership review. Harold slammed his fist on the table. You have no such rights. Actually, he does. A new voice spoke from the doorway. Everyone turned to see an elderly man entering. Harold's father, Richard Wong, the company's founder. I had never met him, but David had reached out to him last week, sharing everything we'd uncovered. Richard had been living in semi-retirement, trusting his son to run the company ethically. Our evidence had brought him back. "Father," Harold stammered. "You don't understand." "I understand perfectly," Richard cut him off. "I understand that you and Eleanor have betrayed everything this company stands for. Stealing from a pregnant woman, destroying careers to cover your tracks." He turned to me. "Mrs. Wong, on behalf of the company I built, I apologize." Eleanor wasn't finished. She played her last card. "Marcus, tell them she trapped you with that baby. Tell them." "Enough," Marcus shouted, surprising everyone. He walked over to stand beside me. "The baby is mine, and Jessica is my wife, and everything she's saying is true. His voice broke. "I helped steal her work. I betrayed her trust, because I was too weak to stand up to you, Mother." The room fell silent. Patricia Chen stood again. "I move for an immediate vote on leadership change and project review." "Seconded," came multiple voices. What happened next was like watching a decades-old empire crumble in minutes. The vote was unanimous. Harold and Eleanor were removed from their positions pending a full investigation. Richard Wong was reinstated as interim CEO. "Mrs. Wong," Richard addressed me. "Would you be willing to work with our technical team to properly implement your software? With full credit and compensation, of course." I placed a protective hand on my belly. "I have a counter-proposal." Over the next hour, I outlined my vision, a new division within Wong Enterprises, focused on ethical innovation and developer support. A place where ideas would be nurtured, not stolen. Where credit would be given where due. "And I want David Zhang as my co-director," I finished. "His integrity helped expose this situation. That's the kind of leadership this company needs." Richard smiled. "Done." As the meeting adjourned, Eleanor and Harold were escorted out, their access badges disabled. Marcus approached me hesitantly. "Jessica, I know I don't deserve forgiveness." "You're right," I cut him off. "You don't. Not yet." I touched my belly again. "But this little one deserves to know their father. If you're willing to earn back trust, slowly we can discuss co-parenting arrangements." He nodded, tears in his eyes, and left quietly. 3 months later, I gave birth to a beautiful baby girl. We named her Grace, a reminder that strength can come with mercy. Eleanor and Harold faced legal consequences for their actions, but avoided jail time in exchange for returning all stolen intellectual property to its rightful owners. Not just mine, but dozens of others they'd stolen from over the years. The software platform, properly implemented, became Wong Enterprises' most successful launch ever. Our ethical innovation division attracted brilliant minds who might have otherwise been intimidated by corporate politics. Marcus and I eventually divorced, but he became a better man and a good father to Grace. Sometimes losing everything helps you find your true self. As for me, I run my division from the same office where Eleanor once plotted to destroy me. But unlike her, I keep my door open to anyone with a good idea, regardless of their background. Last week, a young barista came to pitch her software idea. As I listened to her passionate presentation, I smiled, remembering another coffee shop girl with big dreams. "Tell me more," I said, pulling out my laptop. "And let's talk about protecting your intellectual property rights first. Because success isn't just about winning. It's about changing the game for those who come after you." Growing up in Maple Grove Estates, I never quite felt like I belonged. The massive houses, perfectly manicured lawns, and luxury cars in every driveway seemed to mock our modest living situation. I'm Emma Mitchell, and my story begins with a barbecue that changed everything. My parents, Thomas and Linda Mitchell, moved into 156 Maple Drive when I was just 5 years old. Back then, the neighborhood was different, warmer, more welcoming. But as property values skyrocketed and wealthy families moved in, The spirit of community slowly eroded into something cold and exclusive. Our house stood out like a sore thumb. While others renovated and expanded, we maintained our simple two-story home the best we could. Dad worked as a high school teacher, and Mom ran a small flower shop downtown. We weren't poor, but compared to our neighbors, we might as well have been living in poverty. Sarah Henderson, who lived in the mansion next door, never missed an opportunity to remind us of our place in the social hierarchy. Her husband James, CEO of a tech company, would smirk from behind his imported cigars whenever we crossed paths. They represented everything wrong with what Maple Grove had become: wealth without warmth, success without soul. The annual neighborhood barbecue had always been a tradition, dating back decades. This year, it was the Hendersons' turn to host. Mom didn't want to go, but Dad insisted we maintain appearances. "We have as much right to be here as anyone else," he'd said, straightening his collar in the mirror. If only he knew how right he was. That afternoon, I helped Mom prepare her famous potato salad. "Maybe this year will be different," she said, but her voice lacked conviction. I nodded, not believing it either. As we walked next door, carrying our contribution to the potluck, I couldn't shake the feeling that something significant was about to happen. The Hendersons' backyard was packed with the neighborhood elite. Women in designer sundresses clustered around the pool, while men in polo shirts discussed stock portfolios and golf handicaps. Sarah spotted us immediately, her perfectly Botox face twisting into a practiced smile. "Oh, the Mitchells," she called out, loud enough for everyone to hear. "How nice of you to join us. Linda, dear, you can put that." She gestured vaguely at Mom's potato salad. "Over there with the other dishes." I watched Mom's face flush as she placed her carefully prepared dish among the catered spreads. Dad squeezed her hand, but I could see the hurt in his eyes. We found seats at an empty table near the edge of the party. The only empty table, I realized with a sinking feeling. As the afternoon wore on, the subtle jabs became more frequent and less subtle. Sarah's voice carried across the yard as she discussed property values with her equally wealthy friends. "It's just that some properties really bring down the neighborhood's appeal," she said, looking pointedly at our house. "Don't you agree, James?" James Henderson lowered his crystal tumbler of scotch and nodded sagely. "Absolutely, darling. We've discussed this with the Homeowners Association. Perhaps it's time to implement some new standards." My blood boiled, but years of enduring their condescension had taught me to keep my composure. I was about to suggest to my parents that we leave when I noticed an unfamiliar figure walking up the Hendersons' driveway. The man wore an impeccable suit that made even James's designer outfit look cheap. He carried a leather briefcase and moved with purpose. As he approached the gathering, conversations quieted and heads turned. "I'm looking for Emma Mitchell," he denounced, his voice clear and professional. Sarah's eyebrows shot up as I stood. "That's me," I said, trying to ignore the whispers that erupted around us. The man nodded and extended his hand. "Jonathan Pierce, from Pierce & Associates Law Firm. I represent the estate of Harold Montgomery. Might we speak privately?" The name hit me like a thunderbolt. Harold Montgomery, my grandfather, whom I'd never met. He'd had a falling out with my father decades ago, long before I was born. All I knew about him came from old photographs and whispered conversations. Sarah, unable to contain herself, sashayed over. "Now surely any business can wait until after our little gathering," she said, placing herself between me and Mr. Pierce. We wouldn't want to disrupt the party. Mr. Pierce's expression remained neutral, but his eyes hardened slightly. "I'm afraid this matter is rather urgent, Mrs. Henderson. Or should I say, tenant?" The word hung in the air like smoke. Sarah's perfect smile faltered. "I beg your pardon. Perhaps we should all sit down," Mr. Pierce suggested, opening his briefcase. "This concerns the entire neighborhood, actually." The next few minutes felt surreal as Mr. Pierce explained that my grandfather, Harold Montgomery, had been the actual owner of all of Maple Grove Estates. He purchased the land decades ago but chose to live elsewhere, allowing a management company to handle the properties. The Hendersons, like everyone else, had been renting from him all these years through a complex network of shell companies. "Your grandfather passed away last month," Mr. Pierce continued, addressing me directly. "In his will, he left the entire estate, including all of Maple Grove, to you, Miss Mitchell." The silence that followed was deafening. Sarah's face had gone pale, her manicured hand clutching James' arm so tightly her knuckles turned white. Around us, our neighbors stared in shocked disbelief. "That's impossible," James sputtered, finally finding his voice. "We own this house. We have the deed." "You have a carefully crafted lease agreement," Mr. Pierce corrected, producing a stack of documents. "Your monthly property taxes have actually been rent payments." Mr. Montgomery was quite brilliant in how he structured everything. I sat there, struggling to process what I was hearing. The house I'd grown up in, the neighborhood that had made me feel so inferior, it had all belonged to my grandfather. And now, somehow, it all belonged to me. "There must be some mistake," Sarah said, her voice rising. "We've lived here for 15 years. We've invested hundreds of thousands in renovations, all of which were approved through the management company as per your lease agreement," Mr. Pierce replied calmly. "Miss Mitchell now has full discretion over all properties in Maple Grove Estates." I looked at my parents, who appeared equally stunned. Dad's face showed a mix of emotions: shock, confusion, and something else. Pride? Regret? I couldn't quite tell. "If you'll excuse us," Mr. Pierce said, standing, "Miss Mitchell and I have some paperwork to discuss. Shall we use your study, Mrs. Henderson? After all, it is Miss Mitchell's property now." As I followed Mr. Pierce into the house, I heard the party dissolving into chaos behind me. Sarah's voice rose above the others, demanding answers, making threats about lawyers and lawsuits. But for the first time in my life, her words had no power over me. Inside the Hendersons' study, Mr. Pierce laid out the full scope of my inheritance. The neighborhood was just the beginning. There were other properties, investments, and accounts I needed to know about. But my mind kept returning to one detail. Did he know? I asked suddenly. My grandfather, did he know how they treated us? Mr. Pierce's expression softened slightly. "Mr. Montgomery had eyes and ears everywhere, Miss Mitchell. He watched you grow up from afar, saw how you and your parents handled adversity with grace. In his final years, he spoke often of how proud he was of the family you'd become." Tears welled up in my eyes as I thought of the grandfather I'd never known, watching over us all these years. Outside, I could hear the party completely falling apart as neighbors rushed to their phones, presumably to call their lawyers. "What happens now?" I asked, wiping my eyes. "That, Miss Mitchell, is entirely up to you. The properties, the leases, the future of Maple Grove, it's all in your hands." I nodded, a plan already forming in my mind. The Hendersons had spent years making us feel small, but now the tables had turned. The real question was, what kind of landlord did I want to be? The next morning, I woke up to chaos. News of my inheritance had spread through Maple Grove like wildfire. My phone was flooded with messages, some congratulatory, others panicked, and many from neighbors suddenly wanting to reconnect. Sarah Henderson's number appeared repeatedly, her voicemails growing increasingly desperate. James had apparently spent the night calling every lawyer in the city, only to discover that my grandfather's legal team had ironclad documentation for everything. I sat at our kitchen table, watching Mom prepare breakfast like any other morning. But everything felt different now. Dad kept glancing at the window, where a small crowd of neighbors had gathered, presumably hoping to catch a glimpse of the neighborhood's new owner. "What are you thinking, sweetheart?" Mom asked, placing a plate of pancakes in front of me. I took a deep breath. "I'm thinking about Grandpa, why he did this, what he wanted me to learn." I paused, cutting into my pancakes, "and I'm thinking about all the families like us who got pushed out of this neighborhood over the years." Dad looked up from his coffee. "Your grandfather, he was a complicated man, Emma. We had our differences, but he always had a strong sense of justice." A knock at the door interrupted our conversation. Mr. Pierce stood there, looking fresh despite the early hour. "Good morning, Miss Mitchell. I thought you might want to review the current lease terms. There are some interesting clauses we should discuss." As we went through the documents, a picture emerged that made me smile. My grandfather hadn't just been a shrewd businessman, he'd been playing a long game. The leases all contained provisions that gave the owner extraordinary control over rental terms and community standards. "So," I said, looking up from a particularly interesting clause, "I could essentially rewrite the entire rental agreement." "With proper notice, yes," Mr. Pierce confirmed. "Your grandfather ensured maximum flexibility for the property owner." I spent the next few hours drafting new terms with Mr. Pierce's help. By afternoon, we had everything ready. I called for a mandatory community meeting at the neighborhood clubhouse, another property I now owned. The clubhouse was packed that evening. Every resident of Maple Grove had shown up, their faces a mix of worry and curiosity. Sarah and James Henderson sat in the front row, trying to maintain their usual air of superiority despite their obvious distress. "Thank you all for coming," I began, standing at the podium. "As you've heard, I'm now your landlord. I've spent the day reviewing everyone's lease agreements and I've decided to make some changes." A murmur ran through the crowd. Sarah's hand shot up immediately, but I continued speaking. "First, all current rents will be adjusted based on a fair market value assessment, not the inflated rates many of you have been paying. Second, I'm establishing a community board that will include representatives from all income levels. And third," I paused, making eye contact with Sarah, "any form of discrimination or harassment based on economic status will result in immediate lease termination." The room erupted. James Henderson jumped to his feet. "This is outrageous. You can't just change everything overnight. We have rights." "Actually, Mr. Henderson," Mr. Pierce interjected smoothly, "according to your lease agreement, she can. Would you like to review the terms you signed 15 years ago?" As James sputtered, I continued, "I'm not interested in revenge. What I want is to restore this neighborhood to what it was meant to be, a community where people of different backgrounds can live together with respect." I pulled out another document, which brings me to the Hendersons. "Sarah, James, I've reviewed the numerous complaints against you from other residents. The hostile environment you've created, the discriminatory comments, the attempts to force out families who don't meet your standards, it all violates your lease terms." Sarah's face had gone from red to white. "You wouldn't dare. I'm exercising my right to terminate your lease, effective immediately. You have 30 days to vacate the property." The silence that followed was broken by a small sound. Someone was clapping. Then another person joined in, and another. Soon half the room was applauding. I saw relief on faces I recognized from years of shared subtle humiliations at the Hendersons' hands. "This isn't over," James threatened, standing to leave. "Our lawyers will." "Your lawyers will find that everything is perfectly legal," Mr. Pierce interrupted. "Miss Mitchell, should I show them the documentation your grandfather kept of their lease violations over the years?" The Hendersons stormed out, but I wasn't done. "One more thing," I announced to the remaining residents. "I'm establishing a scholarship fund for local students and a community improvement program. The focus will be on making Maple Grove accessible to families of all income levels while maintaining the quality of life for everyone." Over the next few months, Maple Grove transformed. The Hendersons moved out, their mansion converted into a community center with after-school programs. Other wealthy residents who couldn't accept the changes followed, making room for new families who brought fresh energy to the neighborhood. We kept our modest house exactly as it was, though Mom finally got the garden she'd always wanted. Dad retired from teaching but volunteered at the community center, mentoring kids who reminded him of his younger self. One evening, as I sat on our porch watching children play on lawns that had once been off-limits, I found an old photograph in my grandfather's papers. It showed him standing in front of Maple Grove decades ago, when it was just empty land. On the back, he'd written, "Build something that matters." Sarah Henderson still lives in the city. Sometimes I see her at the grocery store, driving a much more modest car these days. She always looks away quickly, but I notice she no longer carries herself with that same arrogant pride. Last week, I received a letter from a young girl who recently moved into the neighborhood with her single mother. "Thank you," she wrote, "for making a place where we don't have to feel ashamed." I keep that letter on my desk, next to my grandfather's photo. He built something that mattered, all right, not just properties and investments, but a legacy of justice. And now it was my turn to carry it forward. The wealth he left me wasn't just in real estate and bank accounts. It was in the lesson he taught me through this inheritance. True richness isn't measured by the size of your house or the car you drive, but by the community you build and the lives you touch. As I watch Maple Grove flourish, growing more diverse and vibrant with each passing day, I think about how sometimes the greatest revenge isn't in making others suffer, but in creating something beautiful from the ashes of their cruelty. And in the end, that's worth more than all the mansions in the world. One night during our honeymoon, I suddenly woke up to overhear my husband engaged in a secretive and disturbing phone conversation. Trembling with anxiety, I carefully peered at his phone and discovered something shocking. Realizing the gravity of the situation, I took his passport, packed my things, and flew back to New York alone, planning my next move against him. Upon my return, I was approached by a mysterious individual. "My name is Kate," she introduced herself. "I work at an office in New York. I met your husband through a mutual friend. After a few dinners and realizing our chemistry, we married following a year of dating. Yuan is handsome and kind-hearted, but there was something that had been troubling me. My concern began as our wedding approached. Normally, Yuan came home later than I did, but one day when my overtime extended and I returned late, something felt off. I noticed a pair of women's shoes next to Yuan's work shoes, shoes that didn't belong to me. Suspicion grew as I overheard a conversation between a man and a woman. Though I couldn't catch all of it, Yuan's unmistakable voice and the woman's cheerful tone fueled my worries. I quickly activated the video function on my smartphone and entered the living room, only to find Yuan and my mother-in-law there. "Oh, you're back. Welcome home, Kate," Yuan said, his tone apologetic. I was relieved to see my suspicions about infidelity were unfounded, but then another surprise awaited me. The room was filled with stacked cardboard boxes. Confused, I asked, "What's with all these boxes? What's going on?" "We're packing for a move," Yuan explained. "Mom is helping." "Moving where?" I asked, my head spinning. "You didn't mention anything about moving." "Oh, I assumed that after getting married, moving into our house was the next step," Yuan's mother said nonchalantly. "I wasn't informed of any plans to live with your parents," I protested. "This sudden change disrupts my vision of our married life. I can't agree to such unilateral decisions." My mother-in-law's response was casual. "Isn't it normal to live together after marriage? If that's an issue, you might as well consider divorce." Her words cut deeply. "It's easier for both of us to live here, especially if you ever need anything. It's a win-win," Yuan added. Feeling cornered between Yuan and his mother, I reluctantly agreed to move into their home. The transition proved incredibly stressful. Yuan's attachment to his mother became even more apparent. He constantly referenced her opinions, and most of the household chores were still managed by her. Whenever I cooked, he'd comment that Mom's cooking tastes better. It seemed my mother-in-law took pleasure in this dynamic, and my father-in-law remained silently observant, never engaging with me. I often felt undervalued in the house. What bothered me most was my mother-in-law's extravagant spending habits. The situation was more challenging than I had anticipated, and the strains on our marriage began to show. I soon realized that my mother-in-law had a penchant for luxury brand items, buying them eagerly whenever a new release caught her eye. Each time a new product was announced, she would ask me, "I want this, but I'm short on money. Can you lend me some?" Although I thought to myself that if she didn't have the money, she shouldn't buy it, I couldn't object since she handled all the housework. As a result, the savings I had accumulated since my student days were dwindling. When I brought this up to my husband, he simply said, "We're allowed to live here, so don't complain." While I didn't actively choose to live in this house, there was a reason I stayed. Deep down, I knew my husband genuinely respected me. On our days off, he always made an effort to spend quality time with me and had even planned our honeymoon in advance. Despite the difficulties of living with his family, his love kept me going. Finally, our much-anticipated honeymoon arrived. We were heading to Italy, a destination I had always dreamed of visiting for its authentic cuisine. My husband had made this dream a reality, and the excitement of traveling abroad with the person I loved most made my heart race. However, our eagerly awaited adventure took a drastic turn one night. Late into the evening, I woke up to use the bathroom and noticed that my husband was not beside me. Assuming he might be up for the same reason, I left the bedroom and overheard him on the phone. Who could he be calling at this hour? As I listened closely, a chilling statement reached my ears. "By this time tomorrow, Kate will be long gone to the afterlife. Don't worry, Mom. I won't mess up. I'll call you later." The voice on the phone seemed to be his mother's, and the implication of what he said about me being in the afterlife sent a shiver down my spine. Fearful that he might notice me, I hurriedly pretended to be asleep. When my husband returned to bed and soon fell into a deep sleep, I quietly took his smartphone and went to the bathroom. His phone wasn't locked, making it easy for me to access. Although I knew snooping was wrong in this potentially life-threatening situation, I felt it was necessary. I couldn't resist the urge to investigate further. I opened his messaging app and read through his conversation with his mother. The messages revealed a chilling plan. He intended to kill me for the insurance money, which his mother would then use to splurge on luxury brands. The blood drained from my face as the horrifying reality sunk in. My husband had always been somewhat of a mama's boy, but I had never imagined he would scheme with his mother like this. In a panic, I took a screenshot of their messages and lay back on the bed. Even with my eyes closed, the overwhelming fear made it impossible to sleep. The night dragged on, and when morning arrived, bringing the usual buzz of trains and people starting their day, I knew I had to get out of there. I quickly gathered my belongings, deciding to leave the hotel and head home. As I packed my suitcase, I noticed my husband's passport on the table. A sudden idea struck me. I would leave him stranded abroad. I grabbed the passport and rushed out, heading straight to the airport. Ignoring his numerous calls, I boarded a flight back to New York. Once home, I began preparing for my retaliation. I knew I couldn't return to the house where I lived with his parents, so I found a reasonably priced hotel in New York. I started collecting additional evidence and contacting lawyers. Whenever his parents were out, his mother at her craft class and his father golfing, I would sneak into their house to retrieve my belongings. My husband's relentless attempts to contact me went unanswered as I ignored them completely. One day, while packing my things at his parents' house, I thought I had a couple of hours before they would return. Suddenly, I heard a voice behind me. "Kate, is that you?" I jumped, startled to find my father-in-law standing there. He wasn't supposed to be back so early. Our honeymoon was supposed to last until today. My presence there was unexpected, and I struggled to come up with an explanation. Should I tell him the truth about why I returned to New York? But what if he was involved in the plan with my husband? As I was on the verge of panicking, my father-in-law suggested, "How about we go somewhere else to talk, like a nearby cafe?" To my surprise, he made this offer, likely because his wife would be returning soon. I agreed, and we headed to the cafe. "Why are you here in the middle of your honeymoon? Is Ewan back?" he asked once we were seated. I hesitated, unsure whether he was involved in their scheme. If he was, revealing my plan for revenge would be futile. "Didn't your wife mention anything to you?" I asked cautiously. After a moment of thought, he replied, "She hasn't said a word to me." His expression suggested genuine confusion. Relieved, I decided to explain everything. "Do you know about this plan?" I handed him the printed messages between my husband and his mother. His eyes widened as he read them. "I've seen them talking together a few times, but I had no idea they were plotting something like this," he admitted. It was clear he was genuinely unaware of their scheme. I told him how I had overheard my husband's conversation with his mother in Italy, which led me to discover their plan. The shock drove me to return to New York alone. "I see. I'm deeply sorry that my wife was involved in something like this," he said. "There's no need to apologize, father-in-law. It's not your fault," I reassured him. "As for the future, I'm truly sorry, but I'm considering ending my marriage with Yuan." "That's your decision, Kate. I want you to make the choice that's right for you." "I'm at a loss for words about all this," he said. Afterwards, my father-in-law continued to apologize. Up until now, I had only sensed a distant atmosphere from him and worried that he might not think well of me. But seeing his genuine concern and sincerity, I began to believe this was his true nature. I couldn't reconcile how someone as kind-hearted as my father-in-law could have such a problematic wife and son. As I pondered this, he shared an incident with me. "Kate, did my wife ask you for money to buy luxury brand items?" he asked. "Yes, she did," I admitted. "It might be partly my fault." "How so?" he asked. "When we were newlyweds, I gave her an expensive designer bag for her birthday. Since then, she seemed obsessed with branded goods. I wish she'd choose items more appropriate for her age," he explained. "I didn't realize she even borrowed money to buy them. I got really angry with her for that, and I thought she had understood. I never imagined she would try to get money from you. I must have underestimated her." He bowed his head in apology. I had never understood my mother-in-law's obsession with branded items. But even if that was a factor, I couldn't forgive her actions. "It's not your fault, father-in-law," I said. "She continued her behavior even after you warned her. It's her own issue." "That's comforting to hear," he replied. "By the way, where's Yuan? Didn't he come back with you?" I hesitated. How would he react if he knew his son was stranded abroad? I had to be honest now. The truth is, I took Ewan's passport with me, so he might not be able to return for a while, I confessed. I know it was a drastic move, but it was the only way to ensure no one interfered with my preparations. My father-in-law looked shocked at first, but then he chuckled. I see. Given the situation, it might have been unavoidable. That's why he said that. Wait, what did he say? I asked. Well, I overheard my wife talking to Ewan on the phone on the day you returned to New York. Ewan seemed a bit flustered by your absence but mentioned that it might actually make our plan work. At that moment, I didn't understand, but now it makes sense, he said. If that's the case, I'll support you too. That would be very helpful, I said. As we chatted, catching up on everything that had happened so far, my smartphone rang unexpectedly. It was Ewan. He must have realized his passport was missing while preparing to return home and decided to call. I answered the call. Hello. Kate, finally, you picked up. Where are you? I've been worried sick because I couldn't reach you. I'm glad to hear you're okay, Ewan said, his voice filled with concern. I'm relieved you're okay too, I replied. I'm sorry. The truth is, I received an urgent message from my parents and had to return to New York immediately, I explained. I was so rushed that I didn't have time to contact you. I see, Ewan said, but do you know where my passport is? Actually, because I had to leave in such a hurry, I accidentally took your passport with me, I admitted. What am I supposed to do now? Ewan asked, sounding frustrated. If it's alright with you, I think it would be faster for you to get your passport reissued there rather than waiting for me to send it, I suggested. Reissue it, Ewan said, exasperated. You know I can't take any more time off from work. I'll contact your workplace and explain the situation, I assured him. I'll also inform my in-laws. I'll handle it from here. Okay, I trust you. I'm truly sorry for the trouble. Please take care and come back safely, Ewan said. I ended the call and took a deep breath. My quick thinking had helped manage the situation. Thanks to my father-in-law's assistance, the process of moving our belongings and handling the divorce proceedings went smoothly. The day finally came for my husband to return. His passport had been reissued without issue, and he came home with my mother-in-law who had picked him up from the airport. I'm back, Ewan announced. I didn't expect such a mess at the end. Really, it's Kate's fault. She needs to be more careful. My mother-in-law, having heard the story from Ewan, grumbled in annoyance. Perhaps she was displeased because my early return had disrupted some of her plans. While I had my own grievances to address, I kept my focus on the upcoming situation, considering these matters trivial in comparison. When Ewan and my mother-in-law arrived, my father-in-law, with a stern look on his face, said, Sorry to bother you right after you got home, but come here. He then led them to the living room. Please have a seat, I said, motioning to my husband and mother-in-law. They looked slightly startled, but complied and sat down quietly. I fixed my gaze on them and began, You must be tired from the trip, but there's something important we need to discuss. Important? My husband asked, his confusion evident. What are you talking about? I'll get straight to the point, I said, my voice steady. Ewan, I want a divorce. What? A divorce? Ewan blinked rapidly, clearly taken aback. Kate, what are you talking about? You left our son in Italy, and now you want a divorce just as you're back? This is incomprehensible and thoughtless. Thoughtless? I retorted. Isn't that what you two are being? What did you say? My mother-in-law exclaimed, her eyes widening in shock. Do you really have no awareness? What is this supposed to mean? Can you please explain? I handed her a printout of a messaging app screen. This is a conversation between you and my husband, discussing your outrageous plans. What's this? Anyone could fake something like this, she scoffed. Plans and evidence don't mean anything if they're made up. If this alone isn't enough, I said, placing a voice recorder on the table. How about this? I pressed play, and the recorded conversation began. The recording clearly captured my husband and mother-in-law discussing how their plans were thwarted by my unexpected return to New York and their subsequent disappointment. I managed to record this thanks to my father-in-law, I explained. My mother-in-law is hard of hearing and always uses speaker mode, making her calls loud and clear. My father-in-law took the initiative to record their conversation. This should be hard to argue against, don't you think? Wait a minute, Ewan said, his voice tense. Kate, it's not like that. Please just wait. I just acted out of necessity for my mother, Ewan said, his voice earnest. I never really wanted any of this. but she said she needed money for luxury items, and I couldn't bear to see her sad. Now I realize I don't want a divorce. Let's leave this house and start a new life together, just the two of us. How about that? I sighed deeply, struggling to keep my frustration in check. What kind of thought process leads to such optimism? I asked. You should really stop calling her mom all the time. It doesn't sit well with me. I appreciate your care for your mother, but plotting to get rid of your wife for insurance money to buy her gifts is beyond comprehension. Living with someone like that? No way. Just the thought gives me a headache. Yuan seemed unprepared for my response and was at a loss for words. I'm going to divorce you no matter what, I continued firmly. I'll be demanding the division of property from both of you and also asking for reimbursement for the luxury items I bought for your mother in the past. But if you do that, I won't be able to buy any more bags or watches, my mother-in-law interjected, still fixated on her luxury goods. Her obsession left me speechless. Enough was enough. Suddenly, my father-in-law shouted, all you think about is yourself. Have you ever considered how much pain Kate has been through? Are the luxury items you crave so desperately worth someone else's suffering? Do you even understand the emotional burden you've placed on her? His words struck a chord and silenced them. While his outburst lightened my mood slightly, I wasn't finished yet. Yuan, when did you find out? I asked. On the first night of our honeymoon, he replied, looking down. I overheard you talking to your mother in the middle of the night. That's when I found out, so I returned to New York the next morning. My husband seemed to realize something at that moment. You didn't tell the company about this, did you? Who knows? I replied, but I think we'll find out soon enough. As if on cue, Yuan's cell phone rang. You've got to be kidding me, I said. The call was from his company. Hesitating, Yuan answered, oh, yes. What? Fired? Wait a minute, but before he could explain, the call ended. I've already submitted evidence regarding this matter to your company, I said. With the loss of both his job and his marriage, Yuan crumbled to the floor, unable to come to terms with reality. From now on, any communication will go through my lawyer. Don't ever show up in front of me again. Thus, our brief marriage ended abruptly. However, the story didn't end there. My lawyer advised me to report their actions to the police as their plan constituted illegal activity. I followed the advice, and while they weren't arrested, they did face fines. My husband struggled to find new employment, and my mother-in-law faced criticism from the community. To cover the damages and other costs, she had to sell most of her luxury possessions. The only item she kept was a bag given to her by my father-in-law on her birthday. Now, my father-in-law controls the family finances, and my mother-in-law's spending is severely restricted. They've certainly learned a valuable lesson. Meanwhile, I'm enjoying my single life in a city apartment. Though my marriage ended soon after it began, I don't feel lonely or sad. On the contrary, I feel refreshed and liberated from that household. If I ever decide to marry again, I'm done with living with in-laws. Living alone has its challenges, but the freedom to live without catering to others is truly liberating. Now that I'm free from my mother-in-law's financial demands, both mentally and financially, I've started saving again. My hope is to share happy times with someone special in the future. That's my wish. Life has a funny way of revealing the truth about people, especially when there's money involved. I never thought my own sister would try to legally declare me dead, but I guess $12 million can make people do crazy things. I'm Emma Chen, 29 years old, and until 6 months ago, I thought I knew everything about my life. I was raised by my mom, Lisa Chen, after my father supposedly abandoned us before I was born. My half-sister, Rachel, came along when Mom remarried Jack Wilson when I was 4. We grew up in a modest home in Boston, and while we weren't poor, Mom always emphasized the importance of education and hard work. What none of us knew was that my biological father, David Thompson, had been searching for us for years. Mom had disappeared while pregnant with me, thinking she was protecting us from what she believed was his controlling family. The truth, as I would later learn, was far more complicated. But let me start with the day everything changed. I'd spent the last 5 years building my photography career, traveling to remote corners of the world capturing images for National Geographic and other major publications. My latest assignment took me to the Himalayan mountains, documenting traditional villages that were adapting to climate change. It was challenging work. No reliable phone service, spotty internet at best, and days of hiking between locations. Rachel had always been jealous of my glamorous career, though she never understood the countless nights I spent sleeping on frozen ground or the years of unpaid internships it took to get here. She chose a different path, working as a real estate agent and marrying Tham, a struggling day trader with expensive tastes. The last time I spoke to Mom was 3 months into my assignment. She sounded strange on our satellite phone call, emotional but trying to hide it. "Emma, honey," she said, her voice crackling through the poor connection. "There's something important I need to tell you when you get back. Something about your father." "Mom, you're breaking up," I replied, struggling to hear her through the static. "Is everything okay?" "Yes, just come home soon. I love you." Those were her last words to me. 2 weeks later, while I was in a remote village with no communication, Mom had a sudden heart attack. By the time I made it back to civilization and checked my messages, she had been gone for 10 days. I immediately began the long journey home, but travel from remote Nepal isn't simple. Delayed flights, missed connections, and monsoon weather stretched my return into a 3-week ordeal. What I didn't know was that Rachel had already set her plan in motion. You see, 6 months before Mom's death, she'd received a letter from a prestigious law firm. My biological father, David Thompson, had finally tracked us down. He was a federal judge now and had never stopped looking for us. More importantly, he'd recently been diagnosed with terminal cancer and wanted to make things right. He'd set up a trust fund for me, $12 million, plus properties in 3 states. Mom had been processing this information, trying to figure out how to tell me the truth about my father when she passed away. Rachel found the letter while going through Mom's papers. And that's when she saw her opportunity. While I was desperately trying to get home, Rachel was convincing everyone that I had died in a hiking accident in Nepal. She used her real estate connections to create false documentation, took advantage of the language barrier and poor communication with local authorities, and even held a memorial service with an empty casket. My poor sister, she'd sobbed to the mourners. At least she died doing what she loved. By the time I finally made it back to Boston, Rachel had already filed papers to claim the inheritance as my only surviving sibling. She'd even moved into one of the properties left in the trust. I'll never forget the moment I walked into my childhood home. Rachel was sitting in the living room with Tham, surrounded by papers from the law firm, when I opened the door with my key. The color drained from her face as if she'd seen a ghost, which in her mind she had. Emma," she stammered, dropping her coffee mug. It shattered on the hardwood floor Mom had been so proud of. You're supposed to be dead." I finished for her, setting down my weathered backpack. "Funny thing about that, I'm very much alive." Tham bolted from the room, nearly tripping over his own feet. Rachel's shock quickly turned to calculation. I could practically see the gears turning in her head as she tried to figure out how to spin this. "Emma, thank God." She jumped up, arms open for a hug I didn't return. "We thought there was a report from Nepal. We were devastated. I've been trying to handle all the legal matters for you to protect your interests." "Really?" I pulled out my phone, showing her the emails I discovered on Mom's computer. "Is that why you told the law firm I died in a climbing accident? Why you've been trying to claim my inheritance?" I can explain," she sputtered. "It's not what you think." But I wasn't interested in her explanations. I'd spent the flight home doing my research, making calls, and uncovering every detail of her scheme. What I discovered wasn't just fraud, it was a calculated plan that had started even before Mom's death. What Rachel didn't know, what none of us had known, was that I wasn't the only one who had inherited my biological father's methodical nature and attention to detail, and I was about to show my dear sister exactly what that meant. "Pack your bags," I said calmly, pulling out a formal-looking document. "You have 24 hours to vacate this property, and Rachel, don't bother trying to run. The FBI is already investigating the false death reports you filed." She lunged for the document in my hand, but I stepped back. "You can't prove anything. It was a misunderstanding. I was trying to protect our family's interests." I smiled, thinking of the meeting I had scheduled for the next morning. "Actually, I can prove everything. And you're about to learn exactly who you've been trying to steal from." What happened next would shake our family to its core, expose decades of secrets, and lead to a courtroom confrontation that nobody saw coming. But that's where the real story begins. The next morning, I walked into the federal courthouse in downtown Boston, my heart pounding but my steps steady. Rachel had spent the night calling everyone she knew, trying to find a lawyer willing to defend her misunderstanding. She'd even tried convincing our stepdad, Jack, to reason with me. "Emma, please," he'd begged over the phone. "Rachel made a mistake, but she's still your sister." "No, Jack," I'd replied firmly. "A mistake is accidentally damaging someone's car." She tried to legally declare me dead. What Rachel didn't know was that I'd already been in contact with Judge David Thompson's office. When I couldn't reach Mom during my trip, I finally opened that email I'd been avoiding. The one from the law firm explaining my father's search for me. After confirming Mom's death, I'd reached out to them. The security guard at the courthouse entrance did a double take when he checked my ID. "Miss Chen, or should I say Miss Thompson?" he said with a knowing smile. "You look just like your father." I was directed to a private chamber where a tall, distinguished-looking man in his early 60s stood looking out the window. He turned as I entered, and I felt my breath catch. It was like looking at an older, male version of myself. We had the same sharp green eyes, the same way of tilting our heads when studying something. "Emma," he breathed, taking a step forward but stopping himself. "I've waited so long." Tears filled my eyes. "Why didn't you find us sooner?" "I tried. God, I tried." He sank into a leather chair, gesturing for me to sit. "Your mother. Lisa was trying to protect you, my family back then. My father, he was a controlling man. Lisa thought he tried to take you away from her, raise you as the proper Thompson here. She didn't know he was dying, that things were about to change." For the next hour, he filled in the gaps of my history. How he'd hired private investigators, how he'd finally reformed his family's old money attitudes as he rose through the legal ranks. How finding that first photo of me in National Geographic had given him hope. "When I got sick," he continued, "I knew I had to move faster. The inheritance was never about the money. It was about giving you the security I should have provided all along." A knock at the door interrupted us. "Judge Thompson." "They're ready." He squeezed my hand. "Ready to face your sister?" I nodded. "More than ready." The courtroom was packed. News of a federal judge's long-lost daughter and attempted inheritance fraud had spread quickly. Rachel sat at the defendant's table, wearing her most modest black dress, clearly going for a grieving sister image. Her expensive lawyer whispered urgently in her ear. Then my father took the bench and everything changed. Rachel's face went from practiced sorrow to shock as she looked between Judge Thompson and me, finally seeing the obvious resemblance. Her lawyer's whispers became more frantic. "This emergency hearing will address the fraudulent death declaration of Emma Chen, also known as Emma Thompson, and the attempted theft of her inheritance through false documentation," my father began, his voice carrying the weight of decades on the bench. Rachel's lawyer stood. "Your Honor, we request you recuse yourself due to obvious conflict of interest." "Already arranged," my father replied calmly. "Judge Martinez will be here momentarily to proceed. I simply wanted to be present for this opening statement." He turned to Rachel, who seemed to shrink under his gaze. "Ms. Wilson, when you attempted to have your sister declared dead, did you ever wonder why a federal judge would leave such a substantial inheritance to a photographer he never met?" Rachel's carefully constructed facade cracked. I didn't." "No, you didn't think," he continued. "You saw an opportunity and took it, never questioning why I would track down your sister after 29 years. Never wondering why we have the same eyes, the same expressions. Never considering that I tried to steal from her. You were attempting to defraud a federal judge's daughter." The courtroom erupted in whispers. Rachel's lawyer looked like he wanted to disappear. Judge Martinez arrived and the real proceedings began. The evidence was overwhelming. Rachel had forged documents, bribed officials in Nepal, and even created fake death certificates. She'd planned it all while Mom was still alive, waiting for an opportunity. But the biggest shock came when Tham, Rachel's husband, took the stand. "She started planning it months ago," he testified, avoiding Rachel's murderous glare. "When she found out about Emma's real father being Judge Thompson, she became obsessed. Said it wasn't fair that Emma got everything just for being born to the right father. She even suggested we should adopt Emma's future share of Mom's estate since dead people can't inherit. I watched my sister crumble as her husband betrayed her, as her schemes were exposed one by one. The woman who'd once been my childhood playmate, who borrowed my clothes and shared my secrets, was revealed as a stranger. The judge's verdict was swift and severe. Rachel was facing criminal charges for fraud, forgery, and filing false reports. She'd have to repay all the money she'd spent from the properties she'd illegally occupied. Her real estate license was suspended pending further investigation. But it was our stepfather's words in the hallway afterward that truly ended things. "Your mother," Jack said, tears in his eyes. "She wanted to tell you about Judge Thompson for years. She was so proud of you, Emma." Rachel, she knew that. She knew and still chose to do this. I can't defend her anymore." Rachel was led away in handcuffs, sobbing not from remorse, but from being caught. As she passed me, she hissed, "You think you're better than me now? With your fancy real father and millions?" I looked at my sister, really looked at her, and felt only pity. "I was never competing with you, Rachel. You were the only one keeping score." The aftermath changed everything. Judge Thompson, Dad, and I began the slow process of building a relationship. He retired from the bench to focus on his health and making up for lost time. The treatments were working better than expected, giving us precious months to connect. I kept my photography career but established a foundation in Mom's name, providing scholarships for young photographers from underprivileged backgrounds. One of Dad's properties became a gallery showcasing their work. Rachel was sentenced to 5 years in prison for her crimes. Tom filed for divorce and cooperated with authorities in exchange for leniency. Jack visits her sometimes, but our family will never be the same. Last week, I found an old photo album in Mom's things. There was a picture of Rachel and me as kids, grinning with ice cream-covered faces, genuinely happy in each other's company. I thought about showing it to her during visiting hours, but decided against it. Some things, once broken, can't be fixed. But other things, like my newfound relationship with my father, prove that it's never too late for a new beginning. Dad and I often sit in his study, sharing stories and making up for lost time. "You know," he said recently, "your mother was right to be worried about my family back then. But she was wrong about one thing. Running away didn't prevent you from becoming a Thompson. You've got our spirit, our sense of justice." I smiled, thinking of the long road that led us here. Maybe sometimes you have to lose everything to find out who you really are. And who am I? I'm Emma Chin Thompson, daughter of a mother who protected me and a father who never stopped searching. I'm a photographer who captures truth through my lens and a woman who learned that real family isn't about blood or money, it's about choice. As for Rachel, I heard she's writing a memoir in prison about family betrayal. I wish her well, but some stories don't need to be rewritten. Sometimes the truth is enough. Hi, I'm Jessica Chen, and this is the story of how my mother's cruelest words became the foundation of my success. They say the best revenge is living well, but sometimes living well means watching your tormentors realize exactly what they threw away. I can still hear her voice on that rainy November night, sharp as broken glass. "You're worthless, just like your father. Get out of my house." I was 18, fresh out of high school, clutching an acceptance letter to a local community college. My crime? Choosing to study computer science instead of following my mother's dream of me becoming a doctor. Linda Chen, my mother, had always been obsessed with status. After divorcing my father when I was 12, she'd rebuilt her image as a successful real estate agent in our affluent suburban community. Our house was a showcase of her success, all gleaming hardwood and crystal chandeliers. But beneath that perfect surface lay a woman who measured everything and everyone by their potential to elevate her social status. Computer science? She'd sneered, reading my college plans. Do you want to fix printers for minimum wage your whole life? No daughter of mine will embarrass me like this. I tried explaining about artificial intelligence, software development, the growing tech industry, but Mom was already typing on her phone, barely listening. I've already told everyone you're pre-med. The wine's daughter is starting at Johns Hopkins this fall. How am I supposed to hold my head up at the country club now? That's when I made my fatal mistake. Maybe if you spent less time at the country club and more time understanding what I want. The slap caught me off guard, sending my glasses flying. In the ringing silence that followed, Mom's perfectly manicured hand shook with rage. "You ungrateful little snake," she hissed. "I gave up everything to give you the best life. Your loser father hasn't paid child support in years. But I made sure you had designer clothes, piano lessons, everything. And this is how you repay me." She stormed upstairs, and for a moment I thought that was the end of it, just another of her dramatic outbursts. Then she returned with a garbage bag full of my clothes, throwing it at my feet. "Get out. Go live with your worthless father if you want to throw your life away. I won't watch you become a failure. Mom, please." I said "Jeed out, Jeed." She grabbed my arm, nails digging in, and practically dragged me to the door. "Don't come crawling back when you're living in some filthy apartment fixing computers for minimum wage." The door slammed behind me, leaving me alone in the rain. I was 18, had $342 in my savings account, and nowhere to go. My father lived 3 states away, struggling to keep his small computer repair shop afloat. I hadn't seen him in person since the divorce. That night, sitting in a 24-hour diner with my garbage bag of belongings, I made 2 calls. The first was to my father. "Come stay with me, Jesse," he said immediately, his voice warm despite the static on the line. "It's not much, but we'll figure something out." The second call was to decline my community college acceptance. If I was going to prove my mother wrong, I needed to think bigger. The next few years were a blur of work and study. I moved in with Dad above his repair shop, taking online courses while helping him modernize his business. His shop, Chen's Computer Repair, became my crash course in both technology and business management. "Your mother always said I was dreaming too small," Dad told me one night as we worked late upgrading a client's servers. Maybe I was, but sometimes small dreams are the seeds of bigger ones. He was right. While helping local businesses with their needs, I noticed a common problem. Small companies needed enterprise-level cybersecurity, but couldn't afford the expensive solutions big corporations used. That observation became the seed of everything that followed. I spent my nights coding, developing a simplified but robust security suite specifically for small businesses. Dad let me test early versions on his clients, their feedback helping me refine the software. When I wasn't coding or helping in the shop, I was teaching myself about business planning, marketing, and startup funding. 3 years after being thrown out, I launched Secure Small, my cybersecurity startup. The timing was perfect. A wave of ransomware attacks had just targeted small businesses across the country, and our affordable solution quickly gained traction. Dad was my first investor, remortgaging his shop to give me seed money. "I believe in you, Jesse," he said, signing the papers. "Show them what a worthless person can do." The next few years were a rocket ride. Secure Small expanded from cybersecurity into other small business solutions. We opened offices in 3 cities. I hired the best developers I could find, many of them overlooked talents from non-traditional backgrounds. By my 28th birthday, Secure Small was valued at $80 million, and I was being featured in technology magazines as a rising star in the industry. I never Googled my mother during those years, though I knew she still lived in the same house, still sold real estate to the same wealthy clients. Sometimes I imagined her at her country club, lying about her successful doctor-daughter living abroad. I wondered if anyone ever questioned why there were no pictures, no visits, no proof of this fictional successful child. Then came the day everything changed. I was in my corner office, reviewing acquisition offers from larger tech companies, when my assistant buzzed me. "Ms. Chen, there's a Linda Chen here to see you. She claims she's your mother." I felt the old familiar tightness in my chest, but this time it was different. This time, I was different. "Send her in," I said. The woman who walked through my door looked smaller than I remembered. Her designer suit was a few seasons old, her smile strained, but her voice still carried that familiar mix of authority and disdain. "Jessica, darling, I've been trying to reach you." I leaned back in my chair, letting the silence stretch uncomfortably. Finally, I said, "Really? The last words you spoke to me were that I was worthless." That was 10 years ago. She waved her hand dismissively. "Oh, sweetheart, you know I didn't mean that. I was just worried about your future. And look at you now, so successful. I always knew you had it in you." Why are we here, Mom? Her smile faltered slightly. Well, as your mother, I thought it was time we reconnected. And actually, I'm between positions right now. The real estate market isn't what it used to be. I thought perhaps, given your company's success, you might have a place for me. Something in client relations, maybe? You know how good I am with people. I looked at the woman who had thrown me out with nothing, who had called me worthless, who had chosen her social status over her own daughter. And I smiled. Actually, Mom, we do have an opening. Why don't you come back tomorrow morning? 8 a.m. sharp. We'll see exactly what you're worth to this company. She beamed, completely missing the edge in my voice. Oh, wonderful. I knew you wouldn't let your mother down. The Wams will be so impressed when I tell them. No announcements yet. I cut in smoothly. Let's see how tomorrow goes first. After she left, I made several calls. Tomorrow would indeed show everyone exactly what people were worth. And it would be a lesson my mother would never forget. The next morning, I arrived at the office at 7 a.m. Everything had to be perfect for what I had planned. My mother arrived at 7:58, wearing her most expensive suit, her smile bright with anticipation. Jessica, darling, I brought coffee for my successful daughter. She held up a cup from an expensive cafe, the kind she used to say I'd never be able to afford. Follow me, Mom, I said, leading her not to my office but to the main conference room. Her smile faltered slightly when she saw it was full of people, our entire management team, several board members, and in the center, my father. John, what are you doing here? She nearly dropped her coffee. Dad just smiled, the same gentle smile he'd worn when he remortgaged his shop to fund my dreams. Please, take a seat, Mom. I gestured to the only empty chair, positioned directly under the main screen. You wanted to see what position you might be worth in this company. Let's discuss that. I moved to the front of the room, clicking to the first slide. It showed a garbage bag full of clothes on a rainy doorstep. 10 years ago, Linda Chen threw her 18-year-old daughter out of the house for choosing to study computer science instead of medicine. She called that daughter worthless. I clicked to the next slide, security footage from that night at the diner. That daughter had $342 to her name. Mom's face had gone pale. Jessica, this is hardly appropriate for a business meeting. Oh, but it is, I continued smoothly, because Securus Mall's core values are built on recognizing worth in unexpected places. We hired talented developers who taught themselves coding in libraries because they couldn't afford college. We create solutions for small businesses that bigger companies deemed worthless. Everything we do is about seeing the value others miss. I clicked through more slides. Dad's shop, early versions of our software, our first tiny office. When we evaluate potential employees, we look at 3 things: their skills, their character, and their judgment of worth. So let's evaluate Linda Chen. I turned to face her directly. Skills first. You were a successful real estate agent, specializing in luxury properties. But according to public records, you haven't closed a sale in 8 months. Your license is currently suspended pending investigation of misrepresented property values. Mom's face flushed red. That was a simple misunderstanding. Character next, I continued as if she hadn't spoken. You abandoned your ex-husband when his business struggled, then prevented him from seeing his daughter. You threw that daughter out for not conforming to your image of success. And now that you're facing financial difficulties, you've come to the daughter you called worthless, expecting a job. The room was dead silent. Even the usual traffic sounds from outside seemed muted. Finally, judgment of worth. 10 years ago, you looked at a bright, ambitious 18-year-old and saw nothing of value because she didn't fit your narrow definition of success. You looked at a hardworking small business owner and saw a loser. Your judgment of worth has consistently been not just poor, but actively harmful. I clicked to the final slide, a comparison of 2 numbers. This is interesting, Mom. The first number is the current value of your suspended real estate license and frozen assets, approximately $42,000. The second is Securus Mall's latest valuation, $80 million. Quite a gap between your judgment of worth and reality. Mom stood up, her hands shaking. I get it, Jessica. You've made your point. You're successful, and I was wrong. I'm sorry. Now can we discuss my position here like adults? I smiled. Oh, we are discussing your position. In fact, I do have a job for you. Her eyes lit up with hope. We're launching a new initiative to provide a training in cybersecurity solutions to small computer repair shops. Dad's shop was our prototype location. We're expanding to 500 shops nationwide this year. I handed her a folder. Inside you'll find a job offer, entry-level technical support, 6-month probationary period. Starting salary matches our standard entry-level package. You'll work at Dad's shop, learning the basics of the industry you once dismissed. If you complete the training successfully, you'll have the opportunity to advance based solely on your merit, not your connections, not your status, not your relation to me. She stared at the folder like it might bite her. Technical support? At John's shop? But I'm your mother. No, Mom. 10 years ago, you made it very clear I wasn't your daughter anymore because I was worthless. You can't take that back just because my worth now comes with dollar signs attached. I turned to the room, meeting adjourned, everyone. Thank you for your time. As people filed out, Mom remained frozen in her chair, clutching the folder. The choice is yours, I said quietly. You can take the job, learn the industry from the ground up, and maybe eventually understand what real worth looks like. Or you can walk away. Either way, this is the only offer you'll ever get from me. Dad waited by the door as Mom slowly stood up, her perfect makeup streaked with tears. I need time to think, she whispered. Take 24 hours, I replied, just like you gave me 10 years ago. After she left, Dad wrapped me in a hug. You okay, Jessie? I nodded against his shoulder. You know what's funny, Dad? Part of me hoped she'd take one look at that entry-level offer and storm out in outrage. It would prove she hadn't changed at all. And now? Now I almost hope she takes it, not for her sake, but because maybe, just maybe, she'll learn what we learned. That worth isn't about status or appearances. It's about what you build, what you contribute, how you treat people. The next morning, I arrived at work to find Mom waiting in reception, wearing a simple blouse instead of her designer suit. I'll take the job, she said quietly. I nodded. Report to Dad's shop tomorrow at 8 a.m. Don't be late. As I watched her leave, I thought about worth. How we measure it, how we create it, how we recognize it in others. My mother had thrown away a daughter in search of status. She'd lost everything chasing an image of success. Now she had a chance to learn what real success looked like, from the ground up. Would she learn? Only time would tell. But I had already learned the most valuable lesson. Sometimes being called worthless is just the beginning of proving your true worth. Today, Secura Small continues to grow. We've helped thousands of small businesses protect themselves in the digital age. Mom, she's still working at Dad's shop, slowly learning the industry she once dismissed. Sometimes, when I visit the shop, I catch her watching me with a mixture of pride and regret. Last week, she successfully completed her first solo computer repair. Dad sent me a photo of her proud smile, so different from her old country club smirk. Maybe she's finally learning that real worth isn't in what you appear to be, but in what you actually do. As for me, I keep that old garbage bag in my office closet. Not as a reminder of pain, but as a reminder that being called worthless doesn't make it true. Sometimes it just means others failed to see your worth. And proving them wrong, that's the sweetest success of all.